Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is Scott Daly, and what's the deal with airplane food? Okay, so he's dead. This week on the show, we conclude part 4 of The Dark Tower, The White Lands of Empathica. We'll be discussing chapters 4, 5, and 6, in which we finally figure out what Dandelo is, Matt. What did you think of this week's reading after you come back from the dead, of course?
Well, I mean, we made some hides, and and then there was an incredibly tense edge of your seat, just masterclass in ratcheting up tension. Two very different things. It's going to be fun because I think like these are going to be basically two different conversations because the two major story movements here are so different from each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the hides chapter, I mean, you're totally right that the Dandelo stuff is some of the most fun, tense, interesting moments of this book. But I was really like, I found myself studying the hides chapter more this week because it's a little anomaly, right? It's this little thing where we spend page after page of kind of really intricate discussions of how you skin animals and then tan their hides and then sew the hides. And like, it's just really fascinating, kind of really in-depth character work here.
Yes.
A mere 50 pages from the climax of the novel.
I feel like a lot of it is really just, we're getting to really, really know Susannah better than we ever have before. And how are we doing that? We're doing that by making some hides so that they can survive the snowlands. But it's really more, it's about getting to know this character. And really we spend tell me if I'm wrong, we spend the entire this week's reading in Susannah's head. We never leave Susannah's head.
Correct. You are correct.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because this is not a part of the book that I remembered very well. I think we had one of our listeners commented last week that everything that happened in last week's episode, they didn't remember. Like this, the Three Kings, Susannah and Roland's trek through the Badlands. And I think this beginning part, falls under that same category too. For me, my recollection of this book before I really got into it again was Eddie dies, Jake dies. They head to the White Lands and encounter Dandelo, and everything between those two things was just kind of I didn't have a good grasp of it in my head. But it's a huge part of the novel, and there's a lot going on here, and it's very interesting how this stuff kind of fades away after you finish the book. But I'm so thankful we get to talk about it because it's so fun.
Yeah, well, it's not so much plot as like you said, character. And spending a lot of time getting, the feeling and the tone. I mean, this, yet again, of course, this reminded me very much of the part of The Lord of the Rings where Sam and Frodo with Gollum are just slogging through Mordor, or maybe at this point they've already gotten rid of Gollum and it's just the two of them, and it's just this miserable slog. And it's like, what happens? Well, they cover a lot of ground very miserably. Like there's no plot, there's no real plot there, and that's one obvious way in which it's comparable.
Yeah, totally. How about we get into it though? Let's talk about some hides.
Cool.
Before we do that, I just had a quick announcement for you folks. For those of you that maybe are new listeners or haven't been following us very long, we also do other shows. One of those other shows is a monthly book club we do where our patrons vote on a book to select for us to read every month. And then Matt and I get together on the last Friday of the month to talk about that book. And we do it live on our YouTube channel. So we allow listeners to come in and interact with us and talk with us. We really want it to be just like if you were having a book club at your local library or something, except it's Matt and I leading the discussion. So if you've never participated in that, we strongly recommend you do so. We think it's a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun things I think I like to do. I mean, this show is a great time, but I love exploring these random books that I never would have read, except for when a patron votes and tells me to,
Yeah. And this week's book is called How You Lose the Time War.
This is how you lose the time war.
This is how you lose the time war. I'm sorry, what Scott said. And it's very short, actually. Just FYI.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this the day it comes out Thursday, there's a chance that you could get the book as soon as you're listening to this right now and read it before our episode starts, because it's just like 150 pages. It's a real quick read.
Yeah, like 4 hours. I think maybe less than 4 hours on the audiobook. So it is a good one. I recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we'll see some of you there Friday night. It's at 9:30 Central Time over on our YouTube channel. If you want to know where that is, you can head to doofmedia.com and just click on book club in our website, and it'll give you all the information you need. Hope to see you there. And if our vote for next month's book is going on right now. So if you're a patron and you haven't voted in that, head on to Patreon and see it. If you're not a patron, head on to Patreon and maybe you can vote. We have there's a Peter Straub book up for next month, Matt, who is a horror writer that Stephen King respects very well, and they've actually worked on a couple books together. But Ghost Story is up for vote, so we'll see. Cool. That might be the book next month. I don't know. We'll see. Right. All right, let's talk about some Dark Tower. We begin with chapter 4, aptly titled Hides. Uh-huh. And as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, I bet you didn't see this coming. Like, we're just gonna do some tanning of deer skin. 200 pages from the end of this epic 7-book series.
Very detailed tanning. Yeah, I can't wait to try to figure out why this is here.
Yeah, I think I have some things to say about that. So I think it's an interesting choice that when you think about it, I think I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, me too.
But before we get to that, we begin this chapter with Susannah, Roland, and Oy trudging through this. I don't think they've gotten quite to the snowy lands yet, but they're trudging towards the snowy lands of Empathica. And when we left Susannah last time, she was at a big bonfire, and there was this brief respite from the cold and respite from the misery of this journey. But it wasn't over yet, Matt. We're back to being absolutely miserable. And how miserable is Susannah? Well, listen to what she says here. The last was the longest, most wretched 12 hours of Susannah's life. Is it worse than the night Eddie died? She asked herself at one point. Are you really saying this is worse than lying awake on one of those dormitory rooms, knowing this was how you'd be lying from then on? Worse than washing his face and hands and feet, washing them for the ground? Yes, this was worse. She hated knowing it and would never admit it to anyone else, but the deep, endless cold of the last night was far worse. Damn, Matt.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. I mean, this is one of those great examples of fiction, writing kind of calling out to something universal about humanity, because man, nothing sucks more than just endless physical discomfort,
Mm-hmm. It's almost if our bodies are like literally programmed to make physical discomfort seem more direct and worse to us than any kind of mental anguish we're going through.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. And I actually, so I want to follow that line actually, because
sure.
So she continues on from there. She says, "In the grip of a cold like that, grief and loss were nothing but words. No, not even that. Only sounds." And I love that last sentence. Mm-hmm. Not even words, only sounds. Because I think unfortunately, I think everybody knows that there are depths of physical suffering that kind of remind us of what it must be like to be an animal, where mm-hmm. words are not just useless, that they're almost silly, like they're almost just like absurd luxuries that have no relevance to what you're going through in that moment.
Yeah.
That could be, pain, that could be cold. And like, so that's a very deep and uncomfortable sort of human universal. And then, the other thing that I wanted to pursue, based on what you just said, is I keep thinking off and on about how Susannah's grieving for Eddie has been put on hold. It seems mm-hmm. like it's been preempted by the physical misery of the situation that she's been put in. You could even go further than that and say that, Ka is doing this on purpose. Ka needs Susannah to be useful and functional. And so Ka has chosen, or arranged or whatever, to make the journey this miserable ordeal, so that she has no other option than to focus on the present, focus on being useful to Roland.
Yeah, I like that a lot. We kind of speculated last week about maybe perhaps Susannah was choosing to focus on the physical misery to avoid focusing on her grief. But I do think that this paragraph right here kind of brings that grief forward and just says, no, it's not that she's avoiding it. It's just that this is so much worse, that this is so much, it's so much more direct and in her face and terrible. And she's fully aware her grief is still there. She even acknowledges it here. And I love that she hated knowing it and would never admit it to anyone else. Right. Like this, I love lines like that. That's like acknowledging it's such an important character moment to have your character acknowledge something internally. Like, this is why I think you were talking about, we've been in Susannah's point of view so briefly comparatively throughout the course of the series, but I love that we get to be with her here basically all these 3 chapters. Most of the previous 3 chapters, basically part 4 of this book, is the Susannah show. And we really get to sit in her brain a lot. And I think it allows us to really fully comprehend and understand the changes she's made as a person, how she's different from the way she was, who she is finally here at the very end of this story. I think it's really, really key. And part of that is this admitting to herself that, yeah, it was sad when my husband died, but like, I'm freezing to death. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an interesting kind of angle on who she is. Right. And I don't know, like this, I feel like if we had ended the Dark Tower without this big focus on Susannah toward the end, this would all feel so different. Like if Susannah was just here and we were in Roland's head here, it would feel totally different. This whole bit would feel totally different, I feel. It's really interesting.
Totally. It would feel completely different. Sorry, go ahead.
Just like one other kind of riff I had on the idea that you know, Ka needs her to be miserable is like, you just kind of imagine, like, what if as soon as they left the town, Fedek, yeah, that like, they'd been like, there's another one of these trains, and the train leads all the way over to, you know, past the White Lands to Dandelo's house. And then they had gotten on that train and just had a nice comfy ride. And Susannah had the opportunity to just completely, you know, dwell on her misery and her mental misery rather than her physical misery. And then when they got to Dandelo's house, Dandelo would have just eaten them both because she would not have been mentally sharp enough. Right. But because this journey was so harsh, it kept her head in the game. And that's, maybe I'm overinterpreting it, but I feel like that's, you know, if there's a reason why this is structured this way, I feel like that's a part of it, at least.
No, I think you're onto something there. And I think to make the phrase of kept her head in the game literal, I think it keeps Detta in the game. And Detta is at least part of how she succeeds here, is through the strength that Detta gives her, and then the clarity of mind that Detta gives her in key moments during this whole thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Love it. I love it so much.
Me too.
But the two, while they're sitting there freezing, think about Mordred. Susannah wonders if he's still following them and how he's doing against the cold. And then we cut right over to our spider child, and we learn that he's not doing well at all, Matt. He's freezing. He's freezing cold. He has no clothes either. And King is doing this really interesting thing with Mordred at this point, I think. He's contrasting Roland's group, the remnants of Roland's Ka-tet, with Mordred's isolation. And this has always kind of been a thing he's done with Mordred from his very birth, like emphasizing the outside perspective of him, the other perspective of him. But it makes it really explicit in this little section here, because the section in Susannah's point of view ends with Roland saying, "At least we have each other." And then it directly cuts to Mordred freezing in the cold, and it emphasizes he doesn't have anyone. He's alone. Mordred had no one. It repeats this line, Mordred had no one, over and over and over again, to really emphasize the main difference between Roland and Mordred at this point is that Roland still has people. As we said, we go back. I love that line where he says, he hopes he still has enough to fill his basket. And he does right now. He has Susannah and Oy, and Mordred has no one. And the book is really trying to emphasize that difference to us.
Yeah. Especially by being in Susannah's head, we notice this. This is again another reason why I think we're sitting there, is that Roland himself I mean, we can just see from a third person perspective that he just doesn't give a shit. He's being very, very cold toward Mordred, but Susannah is showing a lot of sympathy for him, and I think, you know, over the course of this week's reading, I think she manages to cultivate in us quite a bit of sympathy. Like, just kind of focus, you know, digging into, you know, hey, objectively, he's had a pretty shitty life so far. His short life has actually been absolutely awful, and, you know, just a life of suffering and hunger and loneliness. And I mean, I definitely wasn't feeling too much pity toward him walking into this week, especially after he just like ate a dude. But by the end of this, I feel a little bit of pity toward him.
Yeah, and I think choosing to frame this from Susannah's point of view is really important, because I think one thing we do learn, or at least the book leads us to believe, is that Roland's completely black and white, dry lack of sympathy towards him is kind of bullshit. That Roland is actually underneath all this a little bit more conflicted about this than he's letting on. And it's so much more interesting to read that conflict through Susannah's view. I think there's a line later on where he says, there's no room for pity. And Susannah just goes, he's lying. Mm-hmm. And it's just seeing it from that perspective is so much better and so much more interesting and complex than I think just being in Roland's head and having Roland realize, yeah, I actually am conflicted about this. Because it brings doubt and certainty into it at the same time. Because like you can allow Susannah, who can see, right? So that's Susannah's power. She's very observant. She can see. She sees this on him where he might not even realize it himself. So if we were in his point of view, we might have to just skate by that.
That does seem like a very elegant way to do that. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, cool. All right. So the next day, Roland and Susannah, and Detta, of course, are hunting. They manage to down 9 deer, 9 of them. Susannah empties all 6 bullets in her chamber and hits a deer with every single one. Roland only fires 3 and also hits every single deer because they're gunslingers, of course. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk to you about this one part, because after her victory, we see this part here. The previous night's long misery was forgotten. The numbness had departed her hands and her feet. There was no grief in her now, no sense of loss, no fear. For the moment, Susannah was exactly the woman that Ka had made her. The mixed smell of gunpowder and blood from the downed buck was bitter. It was also the world's sweetest perfume. Standing up straight on her stumps, Susannah spread her arms, Roland's pistol clenched in her right hand, and made a Y against the sky. Then she screamed. There were no words in it, nor could there have been. Our greatest moments of triumph are always inarticulate. I love this so much because I think this highlights, in a very succinct way, the cruelty that Ka can have sometimes. It made her, and in all these gunslingers, but her in this moment, this woman that is absolutely driven for the kill, for the fight, for the gunfight. We've had this beat over and over again through the series, Matt, where the gunslingers always feel the most alive when they're shooting things. But we're in this point in the story where the shooting's almost textually over. Like, we'll take care of Dandelo this week, and then Mordred's still out there, sure. But we've been told that the Crimson King himself, the big bad, cannot be taken down by bullets. There's no gunfight that is going to happen at the end of the story that's going to eliminate the Crimson King. He's immune to bullets. He's an undead zombie Crimson King thing. So there's no more armies, right? There's no more big battles. There's no more fighting to fight. And Ka has created in this woman a person who only feels alive, and in Roland too, only feels alive in the midst of these kind of fights. And it makes you think like, okay, but you can't fight forever. Like you're almost done with the fight.
Yeah, right. It seems like, Ka made her for the fight, and now the shooting is going to be done. And what does Ka have in store for her? It makes me worry, basically, because mm-hmm. I mean, I predicted at least 2 weeks ago, and probably again a week ago, that I think Susannah's probably going to die still. Like there's a possibility that something else could happen. I don't know. At this point, at this point, it almost seems like King is making it so obvious that we're supposed to think that she's going to die that I begin to doubt whether she's going to die, because that's because like I didn't, I didn't predict that Jake and Eddie were going to die in rapid succession, and that's because he let us know somebody was going to die, but he didn't let us know who. And then when one of them died, we felt the relief, and then the other died immediately. But anyway, the point is, I don't know what the hell's going to happen actually. But yeah, I mean, I it's funny because I was reflecting on this and just, all these great moments that we've been talking about and that are going to happen, and realizing that right now in this moment, Susannah is my favorite Ka-tet member. And I don't think I would have said that, at any point previous, to late Dark Tower. Like, I think I generally would have said, Eddie or Roland. But I think because we spent so much focus on her, and because she really is so complex and interesting, she's kind of jumped off the page for me, and I'm really happy about that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, as much as it is a tragedy that we lose Jake and Eddie the way we do, I do think it gives the book room to really dive into this character in a way that they hadn't done as much before. I mean, Songs of Susannah, as we've talked about, was a book about Susannah, but it's complicated. There's a lot of Susannah in here, but the book seems to focus more on Mia than it does on Susannah herself. And it is important the way Susannah's relationship with Mia, I think, is very important, and that helps define her character. I don't want to take anything away from her, but yeah, it's by taking these other characters off the board, we are able to focus on Susannah in a way that King really hasn't, and it just shows the strength of character when that spotlight she flourishes in it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
I like your idea of is she gonna die, is she not? I think this is really fun because I was thinking a lot about back in Drawing of the Three, when Roland told Eddie, "You're done with heroin now. That part of your life is over. Once we get to the tower, maybe you can go home and resume that if you want." And Eddie, even way back in Drawing of the Three, was like, "That's bullshit, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know that this is a one-way trip for all of us. You know that." And so that's something that the book has established from the very beginning, that even if they all make it there, there's not going to be an after. And it makes you it just really accentuates how much these people are just tools to something else. It's and Susannah in this moment just feels like a tool. I think that this moment really is complicated to me, because on the one hand, I felt good for Susannah. Here's a moment she's had the misery of grief, and then the misery of this trek through this world over the past few weeks, and she's just having a bad time. And so in this moment, she gets this brief moment where she feels alive and she feels triumphant, and it's yeah, good. I'm glad that for a brief moment your grief and your sense of loss and your fear abated long enough to feel something new. I'm happy for her. But I think it's like any other high that this book talks about, it's fleeting, it's temporary, and it won't be there forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fun way of putting it. Yeah, it's the suffering was keeping her distracted, and now the joy of the battle is keeping her distracted. But in both cases, it's just serving to keep her distracted.
Yeah. Speaking of great characters, I really love Susannah's observation of Roland here, Matt. As they're preparing to start their hide creating, she had time during their brief but crazily delicious noon meal of seared deer steaks to consider how strange he was, how remarkable. After all this time and all these adventures, she had still not seen the bottom of him, not even close. She had seen him laughing and crying, killing and dancing. She had seen him sleeping and on the squat behind a screen of bushes with his pants down and his ass hung over what he called the log of ease. She'd never slept with him as a woman does with a man, but she thought she'd seen every side of him in every other circumstance. And no, still no bottom. This is stuff like this. observations like this just remind me of why I love Roland so much. What a fucking character this guy is, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and now I can say that, having almost finished the book story. Perhaps this is one of the things that makes Roland a scary character for King to write in his own, words. Because like I think a writer usually, has like a basic sketch of who a character is supposed to be, what they're trying to do with this character. But it almost seems like the point of Roland as a character is the difficulty that King has in, pinning him down precisely.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. I mean, he started off as this just, man with no name Western stereotype, and then quickly morphed into something more and something else. And he's continued that throughout the entirety of these books. I love this fact, like, and it, like the thing I love about it is this idea of we've still not seen the bottom of Roland is fascinating and complex, and I love this description, and it's perfectly in line with everything we've seen of him up until this point. Like this plotting, relentless person.
Yeah,
I like in this moment he like gets pneumonia. Like it's so removed because we're from Susannah's perspective, and so she only sees him coughing. We have no idea how much he's actually suffering, but he like gets pneumonia and then solves it by eating I think it's deer kidneys, which I googled, does eating raw kidney cure pneumonia? And I didn't find any information, and also got flagged by the government for some weirdness. So I don't know if that works, but hey, it seems to work for him almost magically. Like he's just relentless.
Please reply in the comments if eating raw deer kidney cures pneumonia. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that this text is doing is it's pointing out to us that, like, I mean, I kind of feel the same way about Roland as Susannah does, and maybe even as King does. Like, even this late in the story, it feels like he could still surprise me.
Yeah,
he's always been a surprising character. Just when you think like, okay, he's, I this son of a bitch, he's the kind of guy who would drop a kid off of a bridge, and then he surprises you with his humanity and his empathy and his regret, and then maybe you have him pegged in a different way, and then you get some new swerve that you weren't expecting. He could be horrible when you expect reasonableness. He could be gentle when you expect brutality. But it always feels consistent. It always feels like, well, this is just a new thing we're learning about Roland, who is this character of this infinite depth. It never feels like it's just a random swerve meant to surprise and keep us guessing. It's just this very human character. No,
I totally agree with that. Roland confounds me, and I learn something new about him every time I read this series. And he's fascinating, and I think he's one of King's greatest creations, without a doubt. Like, the thing about this series is, like, I love Eddie Dean. Eddie Dean's one of my favorite characters in fiction. I love the Ka-tet. I love this cast of characters. But what I love most about them is how they all channel into this thing that is Roland Deschain. And I think that's the mark of a really well-told story, is that the story has room for these other characters and these other stories that these characters are going through, but really it's all about the protagonist. And it's all about Roland in some way. Everything that every one of our characters have gone through has been in some way reflected off who Roland is and the journey he's going on. And I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, something we talked more about back when we were being introduced to these characters, but how they all do have some way that they are like, oh, that's like Roland in this particular way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep. So as the two begin to work on the deer, Roland says a prayer, and then Susannah says her own. Roland says, "We thank you for what we are about to receive." Roland took the head, and Susannah shivered. It was exactly how her father began when he was giving the grace before a big meal, one where all the family was gathered. Our own family is broken, she thought, but did not say. Done was done. The response she gave was the one she'd been taught as a young girl. "Father, we thank thee. Guide our hands and guide our hearts as we take life from death," Roland said. Then he looked at her eyebrows raised, asking, without speaking a word, if she had more to say. Susannah found that she did. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Thou art the kingdom and the power and the glory, now and forever." And there I've got my Our Father in for the day. So checked it off. Yeah. I want to talk about this for a while because there's a lot going on here that really fascinates me. The first is that I really love Susannah's faith journey through these books. This is something that like has never really been to the forefront, but I think has been consistent throughout the story. When she was little, I remember the story she told about when she was little and she was young and she said her father really lacked faith. He didn't believe in God anymore. And then, but she did because she was asking about it because she was a child. And then faith was something she apparently lost when, you know, someone threw a brick at her head and then someone later threw her in front of a train and she just went through these terrible things in her life. But then she got thrust into this world and well, here we are. Here's the person, you know, reciting a prayer back to Roland and then going into the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. This is the one straight out of the Bible where I think, I can't remember if it was Mark or John that's like, hey, pray this. This is the thing you should pray. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, I spent some time looking at the Lord's Prayer because I've never really studied it in my adult life. It was just like the thing as a young Catholic I just said over and over again without really thinking about it. But it's really interesting because basically the idea was that like the way everyone prays is wrong according to the Bible, because like the idea that, hey, you don't need to ask for things because God already knows what you want. So when you pray, you shouldn't say like, hey, please help me with this test or help me get my promotion because like God's taking care of that. So you need to say words while you pray. So here's the words we give you. Boom. It's these words. So just say these words and pray and I got you. I got your back.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know the Bible said that, but it did always seem a little weird to me because God, this is so weird because in this moment I was literally just going to be like, my conception of God is just exactly the way Ka is described in the book, where I'm like, God's going to do with me what he intends. Like me asking for things, he already wrote the script, you know, he's not going to change it just because I ask him for something. Anyway, I just that's
what the Bible says. It's so funny because no Christian I think really holds true to that, but
that is interesting.
That is, you know, I'm simplifying a little bit here, but basically that is the purpose of the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer that we are hearing right here. But beyond just, you know, Susannah's journey through faith, I think there's something more to this because, of course, the Our Father has the word Father in it, like a lot, and Father is a really important word in these stories, right? The remembering the face of your father is one of like the OG mid-world speak lines that we learned. And the first one that you really fall in love with. I think that even happened to you on your first journey through these books where you're like, man, that's a cool saying. You've forgotten the face of your father.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we have in this book, both Jake and Eddie tell Roland that he is their father before they die. Susannah still, by the way, has not said father to Roland, but in this quote right here, she compares him directly to Roland. Like Roland starts a prayer that is identical to the prayer that Susannah's own father began when she was a child, and she repeats back her line just like she would to her father, and then goes into the Our Father. And there's a lot of father stuff here, and then we also have the complicated nature of Mordred, the son of Roland, hanging out around our characters, and the complex feelings that Roland has for this child of his. It's really interesting because in this moment when Susannah asks Roland how he can feel Mordred's presence, is like, how can you feel it? He simply replies, well, I'm his father. Mm-hmm.
It is very interesting. There's also the angle where, you know, at this point in the story, I think, you know, we had a Catholic priest in the story, so it's not like religion has been a minor theme.
Sure.
But it is interesting that Susannah is sort of coming back to it. And it's also interesting that she doesn't really think about this too much. Like she just kind of does it. And, you know, she doesn't. Yeah,
it feels like the right thing to do in the moment. Yeah.
She doesn't later have like a sidebar where she's like, was she going to re-embrace her Christian faith? No, it feels right. But so we have this idea where even like the Catholic God is basically within this universe a sort of facet or a sort of window into, you know, kind of the great goodness, Gan, this larger force of good, and the symbol of the crucifix is just one of many symbols that are associated with this good force. And so I that's something that pops into my mind as she's praying to God using this Christian prayer, but ultimately the implication is you're praying to Gan, and specifically you're saying this specific Lord's Prayer where you're asking for forgiveness. You're basically just saying things that are worshipful. Your name is holy. Your will be done. Things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Please save us from evil. That's the gist of it, right? I mean, the prayer is beautiful, but that's the gist of it. And this is I don't know. It seems like an interesting place in the story for her to be asking, to be saying these specific things to God, to the White.
And to Stephen King, kind of too, right? Like in a way, Stephen King is all of their fathers.
Yes,
he created them.
I mean, I didn't quite make this connection, but she says this prayer, and then shortly after this, Stephen King delivers them from evil. So
that is true.
You could say that he answers the prayer, actually.
Mm-hmm. He does in a certain way. I like the inconsistency with which Roland is aware of Christianity, because we talked about this from the very beginning, that some stuff he's definitely heard of before, some stuff he hasn't, and the Lord's Prayer is something that Roland had never heard before, which is interesting. It's also interesting that the one line that Susannah omitted from this is "Give us this day our daily bread." That's the one line of this prayer that she skipped.
Mm-hmm.
Unintentionally. I think she doesn't remember it very well because she hasn't said it very often, because Susannah is someone that lost her faith for a very long time, and so she was not regularly saying the Lord's Prayer. But it's interesting how that one is cut out.
I mean, it's sort of the least epic sounding line of the prayer.
Sure. I mean, it is very specific. It is very specific in its specifically Christian imagery, right? Because it's channeling the image of the Eucharist and of communion. So I don't know if that would work as well in this world. So it kind of makes sense that King said, let's cut that part.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. I've never in my life used or heard used the Lord's Prayer as a prayer of like thanks for a meal. Like I've just never heard it used that way. Not that I'm saying it's like terrible. It's just like I've, for whatever reason, never heard the Lord's Prayer used before a meal.
I mean, the only time in my life I've heard the Lord's Prayer used was the time in Catholic Mass where they said, "Okay, now it's time for us to recite the Lord's Prayer."
Yeah, and then
maybe if you went to confession and the priest said 10 Our Fathers or something.
Right. Yeah.
That's it. I've never, like the grace and prayers that I've seen done, like before meals and stuff, is something very different usually. Yeah. But it is, I mean, it is one of the more beautiful sounding prayers that I'm aware of. And so if you're going to quote a prayer in your book, then why not be this one? Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've gone down the Christian rabbit hole enough for one episode. It's been a few months since we did that.
We got to touch the Lord of the Rings and Catholicism every once in a while.
There we go. Yeah, because I'm an expert of Catholicism. No, I'm not. I'm as expert as any raised lapsed Catholic is.
Yeah, I don't know. I think between the two of us, we've got a few years of informal schooling on that. But whatever.
Sure.
I agree. Let's move on.
All right. So the three stay at what they call the hide camp for 3 days, tanning and sewing and creating the clothes that will keep them warm through their journey through the White Lands. I really do love the detail here, Matt. We kind of joked about this at the beginning, but we see them do hard work and we see them do it well. And we talked last time about the tensions between Susannah or Detta and Roland last week, and how those tensions like came out of nowhere and felt so weird. But I think here, as the two have this work to do, those tensions seem temporarily gone. Like Roland is joking again. Detta really doesn't make an appearance here after the shooting of the deer. All seems well, relatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're all having fun. After this long slog of watching the characters suffer, they're actually kind of enjoying themselves. We are allowed to enjoy their enjoyment. It's just kind of I guess from the perspective of tone management, it's It's like we're lightening up on the dreariness a little bit.
And I think this is actually sneakily very important. I think if we had moved right from Susannah thinks that this is worse than losing her husband right into the Dandelo stuff, I don't think the tension ratcheting would have worked as much, because like I that King realizes that he has to go from this misery tone to this, oh, everything's happy tone, to this manipulation, tension rising thing where we're both relaxed and having a good time while simultaneously tense and wondering what the fuck is going on. I think you need that little middle piece right here of things cooling down a little bit before you ramp into this crazy tense scene.
Yeah. It also allows you to believe that maybe she's just being paranoid about Dandelo. Yeah, because we've moved away from the sadness. Everything's good now. All the Roland and her seem to be getting along again. We're good. So chill out, Susannah. Everything's fine. Yeah, God, it's overreacting.
There is this interesting thing, though, because the night before they head out, Susannah dreams of New York City, of Central Park in New York once again. And in this dream, of course, she sees once again Eddie and Jake. And we have this part here that I want to focus on. What world is this? She asks them, and realizes that somewhere nearby, carolers are singing, "What child is this? You must let him go his course alone," says Eddie. "Yar, and you must beware of Dandelo," says Jake. "I don't understand," Susannah says, and holds out her stocking cap to them. "Wasn't this yours? Didn't you share it?" "It could be your hat, if you want," says Eddie, and then holds out his cup. "Here, I brought you hot chocolate." "No more twins," says Jake. "There is only one hat. Do you not see it?" So, Matt, what do you make of this dream?
Well, the weirdest thing is that they're not really talking like themselves. They're talking like Midworldians.
Sure.
Which is creepy. And I think last week I said something like, I have this feeling like these dreams are not coming from good. They're being sent by something that wishes her ill, and they're trying to distract her. But on the other hand, they're warning her to beware of Dandelo, which is, and they're telling her to let him go his course alone. Which, I mean, if she had left now, then Dandelo would have eaten him. So it's a bit contradictory, but I don't know. It's vague. It's weird. It's not like any of the dreams we've seen thus far, and I'm confused.
I mean, it's interesting, right? I love the detail that somewhere nearby carolers, why can't I say that word, are singing "What child is this?" I think that's really wonderful. And then, of course, we have this image of the hat, right? In the first dream, Eddie and Jake were wearing their own independent hats that spelled out Merry Christmas. In this dream, Susannah holds the hat, and it's one hat that says Merry Christmas on it. And Eddie says to her, "It could be your hat if you want it." And so there's this idea of, first Eddie says, "You must let him go his course alone." And then he says, "It could be your hat if you want it." Almost as if to say, this could be yours.
Yeah. You could, you could quit, basically.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
I mean, everything they're saying is to the point of, you could just stop. You should stop, in fact.
Yeah.
Here's some hot chocolate. The hot chocolate it's a bribe. It's saying, look at this sweet, delicious, warm chocolate, which you really want right now because you're in this freezing hellhole. Don't you want this? Well, you could have this if you would just abandon Roland. You could get back to New York and everything would be fine.
And I like "no more twins," because twins have been this constant refrain throughout the story, and I think that is something that has special meaning to Susannah, who is one of two people, right? There's only one hat. Do you not see it? So it's almost to say, no more of that. That we can push all that behind us. All that stuff, all the twin stuff. There's only one. This could be yours.
This is a wild one, but I almost wonder if it's like speaking directly to Susannah, urging Susannah to leave and somehow leave, but let Detta remain somehow magically. Like if there's a magical option for this, if there's another one of those magic mirror chair head helmet things, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, we call that a prediction. Well, why not? We're so close to the end. I should just go completely insane with the predictions.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We'll see. I do love how the dream ends, though, because it says the good smell of hot chocolate is fading, being replaced by the smell of ash, Wednesday, and leather. And the Wednesday there is a parenthetical that is just perfect because, as we know, Ash Wednesday is a Catholic day.
Holy day. Yeah,
it's the first day of Lent.
Right, which is, of course, a period of sacrifice for Catholics. And I feel like sacrifice has been a theme.
Yeah.
And, of course, the reason why I think that goes there is that it's a callback to the moment when she kind of saw Roland smear some ash on his forehead while they were working on the skins, and it reminded her of the Ash Wednesday cross on the forehead, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, I mean, and it once again pushes this heavy Christian imagery into Susannah's chapter, like that, and a chapter which has her reciting the Lord's Prayer now ends on this parenthetical of Ash Wednesday, as if it's just forcing its way in. This constant Christian imagery is like forcing its way into her story.
Yeah, one thing that I haven't really ever bothered to do because I'm so fixated on my Lord of the Rings analogy is to wonder whether Roland makes any kind of a Jesus figure. And I mean, his initials are not JC, and thus I'm inclined to just dismiss this out of hand, because I was taught in high school English class that if the character's initials are JC, that means he's a Jesus Christ stand-in.
Did someone really say that in your English class?
I mean, I think what it was is just like we had read a bunch of stories, and the teacher pointed out that so many of these characters had the initials JC, and they were clearly supposed to be Jesus Christ analogs in the story. And
we do love our Christ allegory in novels, don't we?
Yeah. But it's interesting. But like from where I'm sitting, Roland is not a very good Jesus stand-in, because he's all about sacrificing people around him, or people around him sacrificing themselves for him. He doesn't sacrifice himself unless that's like, coming, unless that's how this all ends. I don't know.
I mean, it's almost if he's some sort of anti-Jesus, some sort of anti-Christ.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm just teasing.
Who knows?
I mean, I think it's fun. I mean, the one thing we have to say here at the end is that we've been talking about all this Christian imagery, and when she goes to this dream of Central Park, it's around Christmas time, which is like the big Christian holiday. Yeah.
The birth of Christ, which that's what I'm trying to, I'm almost like, is Mordred supposed to be Christ? are we, I mean,
the prophecies did say that Jesus was a half spider, I think.
I don't remember that, but
it's in one of the lost gospels. They kind of, it's one of the ones that's under the Vatican.
Yeah. I mean, is this a God? See, now you've got me literally confusing Lord of the Rings with Christianity, because I was like, is he one of the spawn of Ungoliant? No, that's not Christianity.
Oh, goodness. Okay, we got to move on, Matt. Let's move on to Chapter 5, Joe Collins of Odds Lane. So we pick up 3 weeks later. Our characters are fully into the Whitelands now, and Susannah has made some snowshoes for Roland. And she's pretty effective at these snowshoes. Right, Matt? Yeah. I mean, she doesn't even really understand what snowshoes are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another example of Susannah's, power of sight being just incredibly valuable, because all she did was like remember, I think magically, remember what snowshoes are supposed to look like and then make them. Just really emphasizes how vital she's been and continues to be to Roland.
Yeah, definitely. But later that night, the conversation again goes back to Mordred, as it has in these past few chapters. And I think this is important only because something I want to emphasize here is that it seems like every other page, King is reminding us that A, Mordred is still there. He's still out there somewhere. And that B, Susannah is like constantly on the lookout for him. Like Susannah, throughout these chapters, it's like Susannah just like, oh, it's probably Mordred. Or Susannah was looking out, knowing that Mordred was out there somewhere and could sneak up on them at any moment. And like, because we're not seeing in Roland's point of view, we don't get to see him do that. Whenever she brings up Mordred to him, Roland is just entirely confident. It's like, no, we're fine. Yeah, he's out there, but we're fine. And when she tries to get him to explain why, he's just like, I don't know, it's not the touch, it's something. I don't know. We're fine. Don't worry about it. And so it's really interesting, this dynamic between them. Like, seems not worried at all. She is like head on a swivel, constantly looking out for Mordred.
And he's not really being too helpful or too communicative in terms of helping her relax about it. So she continues to be stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before we move on from this, just the chapter beginning, here's the thing. I thought I was being clever because especially when the audiobook reader says Odds Lane, it sounds like Oz Lane. And so I'm like, oh, Oz Lane is the yellow brick road. So we're returning to the yellow brick road. So this is yet more like circles and returning to earlier parts of the story, which I don't think is necessarily wrong. It could be the king is actually, fucking with us on two levels, where you think you notice, oh, it's Oz Lane. They're back on the yellow brick road.
Mm-hmm.
I've figured it out, and then you move on, but you haven't figured it out. I don't know. Do you think I'm onto anything there?
I think that's fun.
Maybe.
I think isn't there? I'm trying to remember exactly where it is, but I think there's a part, whether it was this week or last week, where they like something reminds Susannah of the Wizard of Oz and how Ka is a wheel.
Sounds familiar.
I can't remember exactly what she was talking about, but something like that. So I think, I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think one of the things that you kind of lose from the audiobook is when we first see the street signs for Odds Lane and Tower Road. Odds Lane is written very clearly where the odd and the lane is in blocked text, and the apostrophe S is like hand scribbled. That's what it looks like in the book when it first appears. So like he's hinting at that the apostrophe S was just added. So you could maybe figure out the anagram ahead of time. I did not the first time I read it. I did not. I'm sure there's some listeners out there that maybe that cracked this puzzle before our characters did, but it wasn't me.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but first though, the conversation moves on to pity as we once again directly channel the Lord of the Rings. Do you feel sorry for him? Susannah asks. No, I can't afford pity, and neither can you. But his eyes had left hers when he had said that, and she thought he was lying. Maybe he didn't want to feel sorry for Mordred, but she was sure he did, at least a little.
Yep. And of course, we have to remember, since we've compared Mordred to Gollum, it's the pity that the different characters show for Gollum that actually results in their ultimate victory. It results in Gollum being there, to show up at the end and cause the destruction of the ring. So, using the as yet infallible Lord of the Rings based prediction method, I predict that Mordred's presence will actually, ironically, be the crucial element that thwarts the Crimson King. For that to happen, though, I would expect Roland or Susannah to actually show him some pity at some point, and neither of them has ever really shown him any pity. So I'll be waiting for that story beat. And if someone, like if Susannah has an opportunity to kill him and chooses not to, for example, I'm going to double down on that prediction.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the interesting thing about pity here is that it's all been abstract for them since they have not seen Mordred, like, since ever. Have they seen Mordred?
She saw him long enough to shoot his leg off. But
since birth, basically. Yeah, she's not seen Mordred. So right. They haven't had the opportunity for that pity to play out in any kind of actionable way yet.
Correct.
Whether or not they're feeling that pity. So yeah.
Yes.
But eventually they work their way to a small village at the intersection of two roads. Those two roads, of course, are Odds Lane and Tower Road. Both of these roads are freshly plowed, and a house in the village has smoke coming out of its chimney. Though they have a clear road to the tower, Roland decides they should stay and check out this guy, because surely Mordred will kill this poor chap once he happens upon him. But before Susannah has the time to say, oh, on the other hand, an old man walks out of the cabin and introduces himself. This is Joe Collins. He's walking on a cane and is old and limpy and blind in one eye. And this, as of course we'll learn in just a few dozen pages, Matt, is Dandelo. Here he is. We don't know he's there yet, but here he is.
He's just a nice guy.
Just Joe. He's just good old Joe.
He's a down home fella.
Yep. Before we dive into the scene, I just want to set the tone here. At the beginning, we've kind of already hinted at this, that this is a masterwork in handling tension, this whole thing. The way King controls this thing and ramps it up, it's just like, it's perfect. It really is. Like, I just stand back and appreciate the control with which he wields tension as a weapon against the reader in these couple chapters. It's marvelous. It's marvelous.
I love it so much. I agree.
He's so deft in how he does it too. Like, one of the first moments we see with Joe Collins is this one. The horse whinnied again, and the old man waved his stick wildly against the white, low-lying sky. Shut up, you haybox, you turd factory, you old clap cunt grammar gut. Ain't you ever seen company before? Was you born in a barn? Hee hee. For if you wasn't, I'm a blue-eyed baboon, which there ain't no such thing. Roland snorted with genuine laughter, and the last of Susannah's watchful apprehension departed. I'm curious if your hackles raised here at this moment. Roland laughing at a joke that, I mean, frankly, was not that funny.
Yes, absolutely. But the thing is, like, it's the ambiguity that makes it so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because like, it's not a sure thing that this guy's definitely that you're not like, oh man, that's impossible. Because like, for the whole entire like first section here, I was like, no, I'm just being paranoid. This guy's all right, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh look, he's a lot like Callahan. Like he you know, he's a wanderer. Just like so many of the characters we've met in the story, his story kind of sounds like Callahan as he begins to tell it. Roland just likes him, and he's just relaxing. That's good. This is good for Roland, and so you're almost like telling yourself as you're reading this like justification for why it's okay. Except you're also noticing all these little things, and you're noticing Susannah's skepticism and these little moments where she pings on something. Except the story is portraying Susannah's skepticism as possibly being silly, because Susannah herself is like, that was unusual, but I think I'm just on edge. I'm making too much of this, and so like, it leaves us with this constant back and forth of uncertainty. And yeah, I think it all does start with this one moment where Roland laughs at something that is just not. It's not even a joke. It's just a guy being kind of ridiculous, and you're like, what?
Yeah, and the choice of the word snorted. I think one of the things we're definitely going to pay attention as we go through this thing is the way. It's not just that Roland's laughing. Roland has laughed throughout these books. Mm-hmm. It's rare, but it happens. But the descriptions of the way Roland is laughing are so different from normal Roland behavior that, yeah, you're just like, huh? Yeah. But also, I think you're so right that this is so subtly done, because like we talked about, the chapters before this one have been filled with Susannah being miserable. One chapter ago, she said that the night spent without a fire was worse than her husband dying. And then they got the animal skins, and then they got fire. And then the tension between her and Roland started to abate a bit. And now they see Tower Road, and there's this funny old man with a warm house. And it's just like, there's this sense of relief. And I think King exploits that sense of relief to manipulate you a little here. Like, to draw into question your uncertainty. I love this line. At this, both Roland and Susannah laughed. It felt strange to laugh, but it was a good feeling, like finding something of value long after you were sure it was lost forever. Even Oy appeared to be grinning. And I think in this moment, you want to be happy for these characters. You want to be happy that they're laughing because they were grieving. Oy stopped speaking, remember, because he was grieving for his lost friend. Roland buried his son. Susannah buried her husband. And you want them to be happy again. You want them to find that happiness again. So it's manipulating you in the perfect ways. It really is.
Yeah. It's perfect. I mean, I think another level on which I was sort of making excuses for the situation is that I was like, okay, I get it. I get what, we're doing this mirror thing, or this ring thing is like the ring structure, I think, is the technical term for the thing that I'm hand waving about. And if so, then this character is a mirror of Brown, the farmer at the beginning of the Gunslinger. It's bringing everything back to the beginning. Brown is this is this really quite clearly and seemingly unambiguously good guy who's just farming out there in the desert. And Roland is suspicious of him, but his suspicions are not borne out. It just seems like Roland was wrong and Brown was good. And so I was like, oh, okay, so Susannah's suspicious of this guy, but no, he's going to turn out to be good too, and that's going to be the symmetry. And it's like, no, that's not how this is going to go. So I was wrong. I don't know if I was wrong about him being a kind of intentional mirror of Brown, but I think that I wasn't supposed to expect that it was going to go the same way.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think you're right there. And it's so much fun.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Joe takes the trio into his little house, and we learn briefly about Stuttering Bill, the robot who does the plowing and maintains Joe's house. Constant readers who have already read it will recognize that name. Matt, Bill Denbrow is a character, one of the protagonists of it. And he has this pretty bad stutter in that book, and it gets the name Stuttering Bill. So like, if you're a constant reader reading this book when it first came out, you would just do a double take and go, wait, what? Stuttering Bill? And then like he tells you pretty quickly that he's a robot. So you're like, okay, so we're not having Bill from It appearing in this book, but we do have someone directly named after him.
Yeah. I never would have noticed that, obviously, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, especially as we'll see the way that Dandelo relates to a character from that novel, as we'll get to in a few minutes.
Sure, there's a bunch of inter-king novel references coming up.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch. Yeah. So Joe's house we see is cozy and wonderful. We'll learn later that this is just another glamour and it's all bullshit. But the thing that most catches our character's eyes is a Polaroid of the Dark Tower hanging on Joe's wall. And we see here a paralysis had seized Roland. She felt it in the stillness of his muscles. Then it broke, and he turned from the picture so fast that it made Susannah dizzy. "You've been there?" he asked. "You've been to the Dark Tower?" I love that moment. He just loses his mind. We learn the tower is 19 days away at most. That's how close our characters are to it now. But we have something that is starting to ratchet up our tension again here, which is just wonderful. This is when King really starts turning the screws. "Do you call these lands Empathica?" Susannah asked. He blinked, then gave her a puzzled look. "Why, no, ma'am. I've never heard that this part of creation called anything but the White Lands." The puzzled look was bogus. She was almost sure of it. Old Joe Collins, cheery as Father Christmas in a children's play, had just lied to her. She wasn't sure why, and before she could pursue it, Roland asked sharply, "Would you let it go for now? Would you, for your father's sake?" I love this, because, once again, being in Susannah's point of view is everything here. Because as we've long established, she has the ability to see very, very well. And she can see here that something's wrong. But Roland has gone completely tower blind. Presumably, Roland is observant enough to notice Susannah noticing something, because he says, "Will you let it go?" So there's an idea here that Roland might have caught the same bullshit in what he said that she did, but he doesn't care about that right now. He doesn't want to do anything about it because he just wants to hear about the tower.
Yeah, I think my take was he's just like, we're talking about the tower, for God's sake, Susannah, stop getting distracted with these. Yeah. Like it is kind of maddening not to know what's going on with Roland, because there were moments this week where I was like, oh, he gets it. He knows this is all a charade. It's actually Susannah who's one step behind, and he's just kind of playing along until the moment when he's going to draw and he's going to kill. If he's gonna. I guess I didn't realize it was Dandelo, but he's going to snap out of it, or he's already snapped out of it, and it's like, no, but you get that extra layer of tension because you don't know, is Roland as completely hoodwinked as he appears to be? I don't know if you experienced that, but for me, it was like, I wasn't sure whether he was as like completely addled as he appeared to be. And that was a source of tension for me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think there's signs that say he was like, I think his like getting down on one knee in front of Susannah and begging her pardon, shows that he was totally taken by this thing.
Sure. And the fact that he just kept laughing and at no point realized, I mean, if he had realized that this was some kind of vampire, then he would have stopped
done anything. Yeah.
Right.
I want to talk about this part here a little bit. After dinner, surely the finest meal Susannah had had since being hijacked into this other world, and possibly the best in her entire life. The sore on her face burst wide open. It was Joe Collins' fault, in a way, but even later, when they had much to hold against the only inhabitant of Odds Lane, she did not blame him for that. It was the last thing he would have wanted, surely. I love this, Matt, for so many reasons. This is King's normal, I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen just right before I make it happen trick to kind of ratchet up the tension. But he's a bit more cagey here than he normally is. Like, he doesn't say much later when they knew that Joe Collins was Dandelo, but he gives you enough information to go, oh shit.
Yeah. Stuff to hold against him, but he wouldn't have wanted her sort of burst open, but why? But what does that have to do with anything? Mm-hmm. What does the face sore have to do with anything? God damn it. I also think it's very cute how he slips in. He doesn't call him Joe Collins. He says the only inhabitant of Odds Lane. So he's shoving the road name in your face again. So that you'll feel even dumber when you miss it again, presumably.
Yeah, I also really love this very subtle, this was the best meal that Susannah had had in her life line here. Because there's something about that just, especially on this read, rang false to me, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, really, Susannah? This is better than the meal you had with the Califocan. This is better than the meal you had at River Crossing. This is better than those fancy ass dinners you had being a rich lady living in New York City. Really, this is the best meal you've ever had in this tiny cottage in the ass end of nowhere. This is the best meal you've ever had.
Yeah. Cooked up by a guy by himself with one eye and okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of like, obviously we learned later that the meal was just a glamour and like, they were like, oh God, I don't even want to think about what we were actually eating.
Right.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's part of the illusion that everything is too nice in here. It's too good. It's too funny. It's too cozy. It's too everything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's all suspicious, but part of you is like, well, this is like a world of magic. So maybe this is, I compared Brown to Tom Bombadil. It's like, maybe we're back with Tom Bombadil and he can have a unrealistically nice house with unrealistically good food. I mean, if anything, this guy is like the evil Tom Bombadil because he is actually magically, sucking the life out of them instead of magically treating them to a delicious meal.
Yeah.
Which
the evil Tom Bombadil.
Yeah. I
love it.
I mean, this guy is a better, dark mirror of Tom Bombadil than Brown was a mirror of Tom Bombadil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. So dinner done, Joe Collins tells them about his past. Before he wound up here in Midworld, he was a stand-up comedian from the good old US of A. We watch as Joe Collins' voice changes from his Midworld accent to this wise guy American accent, something that Susannah just assumes is him like really getting into the story. But again, this is another little hint that King is throwing at you. Just another little bit of weirdness that makes you go, huh.
Yeah.
And then here we go. There are probably places in Midworld where they'd cut off your damn head for stinking up the joint. At this, the gunslinger burst out laughing, a sound that still had the power to startle Susannah. Now, I haven't done the research here, Matt, but I refuse to believe the phrase Roland bursts out laughing has ever been used in this book. Like, the idea, like, even Roland laughs. He definitely laughs, as we've said before. But the idea of him laughter bursting out of his mouth is just so fucking hard for me to believe.
I can't even visualize Roland bursting out laughing. Like, my brain just refuses to do it. I mean, this Dirty Harry burst out laughing. Like, it's just if Roland does burst out laughing, like I just imagine it sounding like the creak of a coffin hinge.
Yeah,
like it doesn't work, right? It's so like this is the point where you start to get really uncomfortable. Actually,
yeah.
Or I did anyway.
I mean, like I remember in Drawing of the Three, there's a moment where Roland's hanging out with Eddie and he laughs, and the book even takes the time for Roland to like hear the sound of his own laughter and go, huh, That's weird.
Uh-huh.
And here he's bursting out laughing. It's so perfect. Yeah. So Joe tells the story how he was doing stand-up comedy when his club got raided and he got knocked on the head and ended up in Midworld. And he eventually found his way to the shack and holed up here. And then when the Crimson King went by, he hid in the basement. But Susannah basically sniffs all this out. At this point, she's like super suspicious, and she's decided that all of this is lies. The thing she's not sure of is why he would be lying about this kind of thing. And this is where our tension is ratcheting up here, where maybe you, the reader, knowing what you know about how stories work, are like, oh shit, this is, maybe you've gotten to this is Dandelo. But you maybe not. You just know something's wrong here, and we're just not sure why or what or any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for Susannah, it's still not enough for her to act. She thinks he's a liar, but like, just someone lying to you is not enough for you to like pull out your gun and shoot him in the face. I mean, maybe it should have been in this instance, but
yeah. Well, when you're this close to home, you start worrying about the eggs. Right. I mean, because he does just seem like this harmless old guy, and if something is amiss, you're like, you still don't know what's amiss, right? Even if you figure out, like, even if you are one of the few who figures, who's already figured out that this is Dandelo, you're not necessarily like, oh, he must be a jokes vampire.
Yeah.
like that's not something that occurred to me until everything is kind of explained. And so you're just confused and on edge. You know there's a threat. You just don't know where the threat is going to come from, actually.
Yeah. But then Roland asks for some jokes. He wants to hear these jokes, and Joe starts doing his act. And here's the thing about Joe Collins' jokes, Matt. They're not that funny.
Yeah.
Like they're fine. Like it's just a bunch of one-liners. And they're fine. They're kind of clever. But like, Roland is laughing, Susannah is laughing. Like, the thing about Roland laughing at these jokes is they're all like very US based humor.
Uh-huh.
And Roland is described as roaring with laughter at them. And he's like, Roland doesn't understand anything about our world. Yeah. And so the fact that he like is laughing about a joke about like someone driving a car and a joke about Florida, and he doesn't understand it out, but he's still roaring with laughter. You're just like, okay.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
And Joe's doing this corny thing where like after every joke, he'll what does he do? He says like
boom or bang or something like that.
Bing or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, that's the worst thing ever. That's I've never even heard of a comedian do something that dumb. No, it's great. I mean, so it seemed to me like a lot of the jokes that Joe was saying are just like famous, like Rodney Dangerfield-esque jokes that I've heard before.
It's this kind of one-liner humor where it's just, you'd go and it's this and it can be funny. Like
sure,
Dangerfield can be really funny because what he does is kind of a similar thing to what Dandelo here does. Is he just is kind of relentless and fast with them, where the laughter just starts piling on because you're like, oh, that's clever, and then you just get into a mood where you're just like, you just start laughing.
Overwhelms you.
Mm-hmm. So we're really suspicious by this point. And then I love this laughter. Susannah would reflect later is like a hurricane. Once it reaches a certain point, it becomes self-feeding, self-supporting. You laugh not because the jokes are funny, but because your own condition is funny. Joe Collins took them to this point with his next sally. And this is just a remarkably accurate depiction of what a laughing fit is. Like, I've gotten to this point where everything starts to be funny. Just the fact that you're laughing so hard is funny.
Yes. I love this. This is one of my favorite experiences, is getting into these laughing jags. It's just the best. I think the last time this happened, I was listening to a John Mulaney comedy special, and then John Mulaney tried to drink my soul.
Okay. Classic John Mulaney.
Yeah.
Classic. But then, Matt, in what can only be described as Susannah slaps herself upside the face so hard while she's laughing that her blood blister pops and sprays blood everywhere.
Uh-huh.
It's sure lucky thing that thing grew, right? And even more luckily that Roland didn't cut it off before they got to Odd Lane.
Yeah, I'm really that he said sometimes it's better to let things like this just sit and become turgid and swollen with blood until they're ready to pop.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been so happy to be wrong about the narrative purpose of something.
Yeah, we were like all doom and gloom last week about this thing, and turns out it's just there to facilitate their survival.
Yeah, it's there for Detta to slap off of her face. Is my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, because we'll see that like this happening and the blood and all this thing kind of knocks her out of Dandelo's spell, and she heads into the bathroom to clean herself up. And the reason she heads into the bathroom is this. Aside from the pain, which was abating a little now, she was horribly embarrassed, remembering the time she had started her period in gym class and a little trickle of blood had run down her thigh for the whole world to see. That part of it with whom she had a third period PE, at any rate. Some of the girls had begun chanting, "Plug it up," as if it were the funniest thing in the world.
Well, I recognize this. It's from one of my short list of King books that I've read. This is I mean, just for the few who have not read Carrie, this is the exact thing that happens in Carrie.
Yeah, plug it up was one of the things that the very cruel girls were chanting at Carrie as they threw tampons at her while she was
screaming.
It's
in horror.
It's so awful. Yeah, it's so awful. And I mean, we don't need to read more into this than this is just Stephen King winking at us.
Right. Yes.
And showing that this is kind of also a universality that kids are jerks.
Sure.
Total jerks. So Susannah heads into the bathroom, and then as she's cleaning her face off with a towel, she finds under a towel a note. It says, "Relax. Here comes the Deus Ex Machina. Odd lane. Turn this over after you think about it." And I love the smiley face and frowny face.
Yeah, it's the smile and frown of the drama masks, right?
Yeah, it's the comedy and tragedy masks. Yeah. And of course, Susannah turns it over, and the note says, "You didn't think about it. What a bad girl. I've left you something in the medicine cabinet. But first, think about it." I love it so much. Hint, comedy plus tragedy equals make-believe. And as we'll learn later, this Deus Ex Machina is direct from Stephen King himself, or at least Fred King, our fictional version of Stephen King, giving Susannah the hints that she needs to solve the puzzle. And she does, realizing that Odd Lane just spells Dandelo. And I think this is not only does King do a really good job of ratcheting up the tension here, I think the revelation of this truth is a very satisfying reveal, I think.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I figured it out after King points out that there's a puzzle there to be looked into. Like, I actually paused the audiobook and I was like, Odd Lane, Dandelo, got it. but definitely not before that. Like, it didn't occur to me to even wonder before that point. I do wonder if I would have got it earlier if I had been reading and actually looking at the words, but I doubt it.
You might have. I mean, like I said, the choice of King to make the apostrophe and the S so different from the rest of the sign, like, is specifically drawing your attention to the words. So I'm sure we have listeners out there that cracked it.
Let us know.
People more like Eddie, right? Because that's my favorite part of this whole thing, right? Susannah realizes that this was really Eddie's skill, the puzzles, the solving of riddles. And she says, and she'll go on to say a couple times, that Eddie probably would have realized this right away. He would have taken one look at Odd's Lane and been like, "That's Dandelo. Let's not go there." And it's so interesting because, like, you can see a version of the story in which an Eddie Dean is not dead and the Ka-tet is still whole, that they walk up on this thing and they suss it out immediately and they defeat Dandelo like he's nothing. And perhaps then they don't need a King Deus Ex Machina to save them from Dandelo because they had the strength within their party all along. But Eddie has been taken off the board. And so the only thing that will save them now is intervention from God himself.
Yeah, and the way this is framed, it's like King is saying, this is the last time I'm going to do this. This is your one remaining get out of jail free card. And now, as you implied, if there's any more big emergencies, they're going to have to handle it on their own.
Yeah, and it makes me think about how, when we were last with Fred King, he says, in my notes, Eddie and Jake were with them to the end. And so maybe in his notes, and I'm going to say Fred King version, not Stephen King version, because I don't know. But in the Fred King version, maybe his notes had them encountering Dandelo with Eddie there. And now he's trying to figure out, okay, I killed Eddie. I got to figure out how they get past this thing now.
Yeah.
And his solution is just, well, here you go. Bloop.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's one thing I noticed about Susannah's role here is like she's having to serve all of the roles that all the other Ka-tet members used to serve, and it is asking too much of her. Like she has her own kind of specialties and superpowers, but she can't do what Jake does. She can't do what Eddie does. I mean, luckily she doesn't have to like sniff anything out like Oi, but yeah, like it's this is the story telling us directly, like, I mean, if they encounter something that requires the touch, they're in big trouble because they lost their party member who had the touch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even Oi was laughing, right?
Right.
I think that's one of the most adorable parts is that Oi just has this big old grin on his face, probably understanding even less of the jokes than Roland does.
Right. Also implies that the vampire was going to, consume Oi's life energy too, since apparently he was sufficiently capable of humor.
That son of a bitch.
I know. Now I really hate him.
Yeah, it wasn't until this point.
Yeah.
Of course, as soon as Susannah solves the puzzle, we hear Roland in the other room stops laughing and begins to choke. And that's how the chapter ends. So we move right into chapter 6. Patrick Danville is the name of our chapter. And Susannah tears back into the main room as Roland lies on the ground, laughing himself to death. And Joe Collins, we learn, is an energy vampire straight out of What We Do in the Shadows. He's looking 30 years younger, having fed on Roland, and is in this moment trying to finish him off. You probably didn't get that reference, Matt, but you should, because that's a great show and you should watch it.
I want to, but I have not seen that.
So we have Joe Collins Joe staggered, waving his arms for balance and looking around at her. His upper lip rose, exposing his teeth. Perfectly ordinary teeth. And why not? He wasn't the sort of vampire who survived on blood. This was Empathica, after all, and the face around those teeth was changing, darkening, contracting, turning into something that was no longer human. It was the face of a psychotic clown. A clown, you say? Some sort of psychotic clown that feeds on energy? In this case, laughter? Fascinating. It's something we've never seen before.
I'm going to laugh dutifully here, despite not really getting the reference. I mean, I have the cultural awareness of what Pennywise is, but
yeah, I don't want to spoil Pennywise and it, but Dandelo is indeed related to Pennywise in certain ways.
Okay.
And that is what the book is referencing at here. That's what I think what the Stuttering Bill portions were trying to get you in the mindset of Stephen King's It. And then we see Dandelo here, similar to Pennywise in many ways, but don't want to go into that too much because that's a very good book that we're going to read one day and don't want to spoil that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, sort of, Dandelo could also sort of serve as another, Shelob candidate, although we already kind of had Shelob, according to me. But this, it is basically like a giant bug who, successfully overcomes one party member only to be defeated by the other.
Yeah, you're right.
So
Susannah the Brave.
Yeah, there you go.
Is the name of this chapter.
Yeah.
So one thing we don't talk about with Stephen King very often is his ability to land moments, which is, I think, something harder. It's harder than it looks sometimes. And I think this is a moment that via dialogue King lands. This is surely one of his best landed moments because Susannah looks over, pulls her gun out, and Dandelo says, "Stop," he cried in a voice that was dropping in pitch and becoming something like a cicada's buzz. "I want to tell you the one about the archbishop and the chorus girl." "Heard it," she said, and shot him twice, one bullet following another into his brain from just above what has been his right eye. I don't just that, like, heard it is very cinematic. Like, it's the very classic, like, action movie one-liner before doing the badass thing. But it just works here.
No, it's such an awesome moment. I mean, and also, like, he's not just, he's not just bantering, like he's trying to get her, he's trying to snare her in his you know, his glamour again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, yeah, she just badass shrugs it off, blows him away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Heard it.
Yep.
Yes.
Just because the word cicadas came up, I thought maybe our listeners might want to know that there's going to be a big cicada emergence in North America this year.
Oh, fun.
So this is your opportunity to take your kids out into the forest and then act really freaked out and disturbed by the cicada shells, as if it, like act as though you've never seen this before, and you don't know what it is. Maybe it's aliens, for all you know.
Why are you torturing your children, man?
I probably won't actually do that exact thing.
Dandelo dies and turns into some weird bug-looking thing, and then we get Roland eating crow a little bit here. He says, "Gunslinger, I was mazed," Roland said in a husky, trembling voice. "I was taken in like a child, and I cry your pardon." "Roland, no, get up." That was Detta, who always seemed to come out when Susannah was under great strain. She thought, "It's a wonder I didn't say, 'Get up, honky,' and had to choke back a cry of hysterical laughter." He would not have understood. "Give me pardon first," Roland said, not looking at her. So I think, like, a couple weeks ago, we questioned why Susannah was on this quest, didn't we? Right? Like, why is she still here? Why Roland needed other people still?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the reason, right?
Yeah.
It would have been better if it was Eddie. Eddie would have noticed right away. But as Roland said, hopefully Susannah was still enough to fill his basket. And in this moment, she was. Because without Susannah here, Roland would have fallen.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I also, one thing I really like about this exchange is, you know, Susannah thinks, wow, it's really surprising that he didn't, that she didn't say, "Get up, honky," because that's what Detta would have said. And that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Detta is coming around on him. Detta called him Roland, you know, and then in a minute we're going to see Detta show some, you know, real human empathy. So like, I think that, like, Detta, the killer, the murderer, I mean, not that she's ever really murdered anyone, but we have this idea of her as this evil creature. I think that Roland's going to have to fix his attitude toward Detta, because Detta has fixed her attitude toward him, I think. That's my interpretation, drawing on these few moments in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is I think the clever thing about what King has done over the course of these 2 weeks is that we had these moments last week where Detta was back and here, and she was being nasty to Roland,
mm-hmm.
like really nasty to him again, like calling him Gray Boy, which is something we hadn't heard since Drawing of the Three.
Mm-hmm.
And so King introduces us to this again, reminds us of this facet of the Detta personality, and then subverts it afterwards to make it stick out more. So suddenly Detta is not saying "Get up, honky." And then you're right, a little bit later when she's talking to Patrick Danville, suddenly Detta is kind. You would not think the voice of kindness and trying to comfort a child would come from Detta Walker. Never, ever. And yet here she is doing that. And that is by re-emphasizing the Detta behavior a couple weeks ago, it makes it clear how different this is now.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important and really smart to kind of replant that seed for us, because a reader that has been following along with the series from day one and the 30 years it has stretched probably doesn't remember exactly how Detta talked to Roland
mm-hmm.
when they first. So King brings it back for us a little bit here, and then gets to subvert it in a really fun way. And we're like, oh, what is happening to Detta Walker? Yeah,
right. Because I think you could easily just pass over this and not take it, you know, literally when she says, like, hey, it's a wonder. It's a wonder that I didn't say "Get up, honky." It's like, well, it kind of is. It kind of is a wonder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm shocked, actually. It actually means something.
Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, just to return back to what I said a minute ago, like, you know, too much is being asked of Susannah. You know, she shoots, she sews, she makes snowshoes, she solves anagrams. It's kind of a lot to ask of this one person. And like, I mean, it's not like Roland's like useless, but it seems like she's been instrumental in a lot of the, you know, their recent victories. And I don't know how much longer she can kind of carry all of that load.
She's definitely trio MVP right now in just about every way. Yeah. I mean, she even, I think it's so clever. She shot more of the deer than Roland did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like Roland shot 6 times and missed 3 times. That's not what happened. But she still, I mean, yes, Roland's the one chasing them and ferreting them out of the forest. So like it was her job to shoot them. But it is interesting that 9 deer are shot. Susannah's responsible for 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's better at sewing than him.
Mm-hmm.
She makes the snowshoes for him.
Right.
She saves them here.
Right.
She figures everything out. She figures she's the one that calms Patrick Danville down. Roland isn't able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's and it's like, okay, well, how much longer can that keep going? You know?
Yeah.
And you're, I mean, I feel like narratively speaking, you're showing how reliant Roland is on her, so that when she's taken away by some means or another, it's even more, you know, oh shit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know about. As I expressed earlier, I'm increasingly uncertain about how that's going to go.
Yeah, we'll see. But first, we got to read some poems. So Susannah takes Roland back into the bathroom, and they find what has been left for them in the medicine cabinet. It's another note from Stephen King that says, "Child Roland of Gilead, Susannah Dean of New York, you saved my life. I've saved yours. All debts are paid. Stephen King." Really, I love this note. Like, all debts are paid. Like, he did this Deus Ex Machina because he recognized that he owed Roland a debt.
Yeah,
which is hilarious because the reason he owed Roland a debt is because he wrote in the my head.
I know. I can accept it if I just accept that Stephen King isn't actually in control of the story, but he can exert himself for little things like this. Yeah.
But most importantly, we see inside this envelope is a copy of Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. And I think in this moment, you kind of remember how cheeky and happy Fred King was when he probably thought of this very moment back at the end of the last part of part 3,
mm-hmm.
where he's like, yes, the perfect place to put this poem in.
Yeah.
And here it is. King has helpfully circled a few stanzas for both us and for the characters for us to focus on. And I'm not going to read all of these stanzas, although, gosh, remember when we said I didn't know what to do with poetry? In the process of doing the show over the past year, I've fallen in love with poetry, and I could spend a whole show talking about these 5 stanzas that were given here. I'm not going to do that because I think the book, like, King is kind enough to highlight for us what he means us to get out of these stanzas.
Right.
Basically, we have one that describes Dandelo himself. We have one that describes the stick he used to wave around. We have one that describes Old Lippy, the spooky dying horse that we met out front. And then we have the 16th stanza that mentions Cuthbert himself by name. I love. Let's read the 16th stanza and talk about this one, because the interesting thing about this structure is the first 4 are basically Stephen King took the poem Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, which he used as the inspiration for this entire series, and then wrote a character and a horse to match what was said in this poem, which is just, that's what he did. That's what he did for this section. I'm talking Stephen King. I'm not talking Fred King. Stephen King, the author of this book, just matched what was said here to a fun idea he had. And that's what he did. But then we see this last stanza that he provided, the 16th and final stanza that was circled here. And it says, "Not it. I fancied Cuthbert's reddening face beneath its garniture of curly gold. Dear fellow, till I almost felt him fold an arm in mine to fix me to the place that way he used. Alas, one night's disgrace, out went my heart's new fire and left it cold." So this is basically talking about Cuthbert, one of his old friends, and I almost felt him fold an arm in mine to fix me to the place the way he used. So I almost in Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, the central character is seeing ghosts from his pasts and is trying to gather strength from him, and he sees an image of Cuthbert, and he feels him like almost like enjoying a fold an arm in his, the way he used to be, like the way we used to be bonded together. But one night's disgrace out when my heart's new fire and left it cold. So he was unable. And in Roland's mind, Roland's interpretation is immediately, this is when I fell out with Cuthbert. When we had the fight about Susan, we were never quite as close as we were. But the question I want to ask you, and the thing I want to search here is, why the fuck did Stephen King circle this passage for Roland? It has nothing to do with Patrick Danville. It has nothing to do with Dandelo. It has nothing to do with Lippy, the spooky dying horse. What is the meaning of this stanza in particular? Why was this one important enough to say, hey, Roland, read this one?
I mean, all I can think is to remind him of Cuthbert, and, you know, maybe something specific about Cuthbert, maybe just the sheer fact of, like, this is yet another one of your old friends who you've left dead behind you. Maybe there's some specific, like it could be anything, you know, either of those or anything in between, I guess. I don't know. I don't have any clear guesses here, but you're right that all the other ones really have a sort of immediate, like, that is this thing that just happened. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, and also Cuthbert. And I mean, part of it, I think in the moment I was thinking, like, so King is making it clear that a lot of the ideas that make up the Dark Tower come from this poem. Mm-hmm. And that this is a very central poem, which I guess, you know, the final stanza of the poem, which you told me not to read the poem, so I still haven't. So I don't actually know what the final stanza says. And so presumably Roland, you know, maybe does see how the poem ends, maybe doesn't. But, like, the idea here is that they're telling the characters, like, this poem is a key to, you know, to how the story is going to go.
Yeah, more so than Stephen King's own books. I think that's so funny. Like, Roland looks at the book Insomnia and is told specifically, this relates to the Dark Tower very importantly, and he goes, fuck off.
Yeah.
And then, but he gets a copy of Child World with the Dark Tower Came. And yeah, I mean, he goes to read the final stanza of the poem. He gets interrupted. This is when we hear Patrick Danville cry out and they have to go investigate it. So we don't get to see the final stanza. And yeah, it's not exactly clear whether Roland reads it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think intentionally unclear. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot to say here. I want to save some of the conversation for the end of the book, but it's just fun seeing this in here and asking these questions. Yeah. Like, did you just circle this, Stephen, so Roland could read the name Cuthbert and go,
yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know. I think we might see if Cuthbert specifically comes up again in the next, you know, before the story ends, then maybe it'll clarify why this exactly. I agree, though. It's really fun to just watch the characters muse over this, kind of the way we do. You know, like what does this mean? You know,
right?
What is it?
I mean,
yeah.
It's wild that this is a poem written, you know, 100 and something years ago, and the characters are basically saying, I don't know how, but this Robert Browning guy must have seen Dandelo. Mm-hmm. He must have seen him. He must have seen Lippy, the spooky dying horse.
Yeah.
He must have seen all this. He must have seen Magus. How is that possible?
Right. Yeah. He must have also channeled it from the beam, basically.
So fun. Yeah. So fun. All right. So they once again hear that crying noise that Susannah thought was wind, and they go to inspect it. It's actually not wind. It's Patrick Danville locked in a cage in the basement. I love this line here. The prisoner in question stood at the bars of his detainment, holding his filthy hands out to them. He was so scrawny that he reminded Susannah of a certain terrible concentration camp photo she'd seen, images of those who had survived Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald. That's a terrible German, I'm sorry. Living, if barely, indictments of mankind as a whole, with their striped uniforms hanging off them and their ghastly bellboys' pillbox hats still on their heads and their terrible bright eyes so full of awareness. We wish we did not know what we have become, those eyes said, but unfortunately, we do. That's just really wonderful writing there.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a really, you immediately understand what this poor guy looks like.
Yeah, God, I mean, you're right. This whole section just fills you with so much pity for Danville, and like really efficiently too. I mean, this is yet another example of how good King is. It just like introduce a character, decide that you're gonna love this character, and then make that happen within like 3 pages.
Yeah, I do have this interesting thing that happens to me that I think you will be blissfully. It won't be a problem for you, but Patrick Danville in Insomnia is a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so like even here when they say he's this 17-year-old kid, I still in my mind's eye I picture him as a very young boy, and I just can't get that image out of my head. So everything I see him do in this book, I just see a young boy doing.
Yeah, I don't have that problem, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So Patrick, as we said, is about 17 and he's absolutely traumatized, but we hinted at this earlier. It is Detta Walker, of all people, who tries to comfort him. No, honey, this was a Detta Walker Susannah had never heard before, nor suspected. No, honey, I ain't gonna hurt you. If I meant to do that, I'd have just put 2 in your head like I did to the Muffa upstairs. So, I mean, is there anything more? We kind of touched on this already. Is there anything more you want to say about the choice to make this Detta Walker here?
I think Detta is just coming more to the fore as kind of a whole character. And I think it's actually been happening ever since like the Song of Susannah, where, you know, that was the first time where we saw her kind of step up and be like, all right, I'm going to help you through this situation. And, you know, we realized she's on Susannah's side. You know, like she went away for a while, and then when she came back, she was different, and she's been more human and more helpful ever since then. And, you know, even when she's, you know, glaring daggers at Roland, you get the sense that it's out of a pretty justified mistrust and skepticism, because like she's smart and she knows that Roland's quest is going to get her killed. Like that's the direction this is going. So it's not like it's even unreasonable for him, for her to be upset with Roland. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like she's sort of coming into her own as a fully fledged, complex human being, rather than just kind of all of the you know, the rage and other evil emotions that Odetta Holmes needed to lock away.
Yeah, and it's, to me, it's not just that Detta Walker shows kindness here in a way that she hasn't really ever done before, but that she's the one that chooses to speak here. Like, we've kind of seen that Detta Walker comes out of Susannah basically outside of her control. She just kind of pops in whenever she feels it's the most appropriate. So, like, it's not only that Detta Walker has sympathy for this kid, but it's that she has so much sympathy for him that she comes forward to try to calm him before Susannah can, which is really fascinating. And I mean, like, I think there is a connection she feels, Detta does, to this poor abused child. Detta was not, Detta, Susannah, any of these that did not go through what Patrick went through, but Detta was created after a severe trauma fucked up Susannah or Odetta, whatever, all of them fucked them up. She was created after that moment. And so looking at this kid, this poor kid who is terrified and scared and traumatized, she feels kinship with him in a way. And so she's the one that comes forward, because that's why she was created, to deal with the trauma. And so here she's dealing with the trauma. Yeah. But in a different way than she normally did. Before, she dealt with the trauma in rage. Now she's dealing with the trauma with kindness.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, back when Susannah was first introduced, I thought that what we were being told by the book was Susannah is the synthesis of Detta and Odetta.
Yep.
And it seems more like Susannah is Odetta with the blinders removed, but not necessarily with all of the viciousness that makes up Detta. Yeah. Because we eventually learned that Detta was still in there, while Odetta is not still in there. There's no inner Odetta that leaks out every now and then. That's just kind of who Susannah is. Yeah. And so now things are actually returning to a kind of balance we haven't seen before, where a personality you could call Odetta and a personality you could call Detta are sort of trading their time in the spotlight, but not in this way that involves like a blackout. It's just, this is a moment that calls for more of a soft humanity, and this is a moment that calls for more shooting and killing and anger.
It's a symbiotic rather than parasitic relationship between the two of them. Yeah, I mean, if I had to speculate intent without any actual knowledge of intent. I would say that I think Stephen King probably imagined Susannah as this perfect synthesis of the two halves, and then he just kind of changed his mind about it and thought that Susannah remaining with these two halves of her and having that be part of her ongoing struggle, and that Detta was just such an interesting character that he really wanted to play with her a little bit more. That's what it's always felt like to me, because I really do think when you read the end of Drawing of the Three, there is this real feeling that this is one person created from two, like all of their strengths, none of their weaknesses type thing.
Yeah.
And that's just not what it ended up being.
I think maybe, I can see King, sitting with that and deciding like, no, that's just too easy. That's too pat.
Yeah. I mean, the question becomes, what do you do with her then? Right. Yeah. Like I think the problem he kind of wrote himself in is that he solved Susannah's problem in the first book she was introduced, and then needed to figure out what to do with her from then on. And by kind of falling back on her original struggle, he kind of created this conflict and this tension that he was able to carry through the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think, this is maybe going to sound like more of a criticism than I mean it, but you could say that the joining of Detta and Odetta is sort of yada yada yada, in the sense that it's just like, and then they saw each other in the doorway and then they were one. And it's like, okay, that worked in the moment just fine, and I liked it. I didn't have any complaints, but also I don't know what that means, and I don't know what that's like. What is the inner experience of that? I have no reference point for this, and it's. I think at the end of that book, I remember saying like, yeah, I can't wait to like figure out what Susannah's deal is, and like, what does it mean to be the joining of two people? And the truth is, we didn't. We didn't really, because Detta remained in the background and then came to the fore again. And so, yeah, I don't know. This feels better to me, actually, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I like this a lot. So we see here Patrick Danville has his tongue sliced out, and the Dandelo was keeping him down here to feed on him like a cow, like to feed on his energy slowly over time, sucking laughter out of him, yes, but also fear. This is the White Lands of Empathica. It's not just laughter, Matt. It's also, it's any emotions. It's any empathetic emotion that he's sucking out to feed off of.
So are we to take that literally, and like this is literally a region of the world that has the property of like emotions are fungible, or are we being artistic with language and it's just this one monster that has this capability? I just
don't know.
Okay.
I just don't know. So despite all of the trauma that Patrick has gone through, we find out that he is a very skilled artist, which is something we kind of knew before because we saw those creepy posters back in Sayre's office room. And so he communicates to Susannah and Roland through writing and through drawing because he can't talk. And I really love this part here, Matt. Subject matter aside, she could have watched him draw for hours. In fact, she did. The speed of the pencil was eerie, and neither of them ever thought to give him one of the amputated erasers, for there seemed to be no need. So as far as Susannah could see, the boy either never made a mistake or incorporated the mistakes into his drawings in a way that made them, well, why stick at the words if they were the right words? Little acts of genius. And the resulting pictures weren't sketches, not really, but finished works of art in themselves. She knew what Patrick, this one or another Patrick from another world along the path of the beam, would later be capable of with oil paints, and such knowledge made her feel cold and hot at the same time. What did they have here? A tongueless Rembrandt? It occurred to her that this was the second idiot savant, their third if you counted Oy as well as Shimi.
That's great, but also I feel like she's missing a few, because like we have a lot of characters with disabilities in one domain, but superpowers in another. Do I have to point out that she's a double amputee who has this like suite of superpowers that makes her invaluable? Like it happens over and over. Actually, it's I think far more than just three.
I don't know if that would qualify under idiot savant, which I want to preface, like that's a pretty dated term these days. Yes. Like we don't really use that term anymore, but I don't think that would qualify under the meaning, the intent of the meaning.
Well, I agree, but I also don't think that Oy counts as one either under that definition, because he's just the dog creature.
Yeah, but he's super awesome dog creature.
Yes, but that's the thing is he has disadvantages and then he has advantages. I'm not like I'm just noticing. I don't think this is the first time I've noticed that like it's not uncommon in this story for there to be characters who have issues in one domain and then almost supernatural powers in another, and like how many characters have we met where they just are awesome and just have an awesome power and that's it, like with no drawback. I mean, you could even say Eddie, for all that he's like a specimen of man, he was a heroin addict. Like he had a thing he was struggling with, which in this case was not so much physical but something that he had done to himself. But yeah, I mean, it's a theme for sure. I'm not contradicting. I'm just saying like, yeah, it's bigger than just that. It's bigger than just what she's saying.
You're absolutely right. I really think King is using idiot savant in this case to literally just mean person that can't communicate very well but is super skilled at something. I really think that's all. That's like he's simplifying this very outdated term to its most basic level.
I think you're right there.
But I love Patrick Danville. I love this description, like the love with which he creates art. I didn't copy it, but I also love this part later where where Stuttering Bill comes and he's trying to get their attention and say that this is Bill coming, and he crosses an X through the beautiful image of Oi he drew so he can indicate what he's referring to. And Susannah's like, oh.
Yeah, I love that.
So Susannah, while they're hanging out here, though, is dreaming, and we have to talk about her dream, Matt, because it's pretty important. Each night in her dreams, at least once, she saw the tower in that photograph standing at the end of its field of roses, sooty gray-black stones against a troubled sky, where the cloud streamed out in 4 directions along the 2 beams that still held. She knew what the voices sang, Kamala, 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 come, but she did not think they sang to her or for her. No, say never in life. This was Roland's song and Roland's alone. But she had begun to hope that did not necessarily mean she was going to die between here and the end of her quest. She had been having her own dreams.
Yeah, so finally she gets to see the tower in her dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what we were talking about before. We said it a million times. Susannah's never seen the tower. But now she gets her tower dream. Of course, it doesn't seem to strike her the same way it struck the others.
No, I mean, everyone else that's seen this dream, the tower was calling out to them.
Yeah.
And it textually, she hears the tower's call and knows it's not for her.
Right.
That this is not for me.
Yeah. Although interestingly, she does feel like, well, I would like to see it though.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to not die. But
yeah. But this is all part of something that you've been kind of noticing throughout the last few weeks, that the book is like saying, hey, Susannah,
don't come.
Yeah. Don't come here.
Yeah.
And this is like, she had been having her own dreams, is the book calling back to the dreams that we've been party to, right? The dreams of Jake and Eddie in New York, the dreams of Eddie saying, this hat can be yours if you want it. You can take this. You can have this if you want it.
It's interesting because like it feels, I don't want to say it feels fake, but like it's not like this overwhelming mystical experience like the others had. It's just like, it's like if I woke up and I told you I saw a building in a dream. You're just like, yeah, it was kind of a neat building.
Yeah,
it's like that. Nothing like what Jake and Eddie like experience in their dreams, which makes me wonder if this is even like a real authentic dream of the tower, or if it's almost like somebody saying like, hey, look, the tower is telling you not to come. See the tower? It looks just like the picture you saw. Isn't that suspicious that it looks just like a photograph that you saw? Because you saw the photo and thus that's your reference point. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know, man. It's confusing.
So can you, we've already done this kind of, but do you want at the end of this episode to give a speculate what's going to happen to Susannah? Do you want to just take a shot? What's going to happen to Susannah?
Shoot. I mean, like either she dies or she decides not to continue, or she does continue and doesn't die, which I see as being the least likely.
I mean, I think you just like, you just
I mean, those are the only possibilities.
Those are the, you just said, my prediction is one of the three
physical possibilities of things that could possibly happen. I mean, part of me actually wants to go for like the twist ending where no, like she just makes it, like despite all of the stacking the deck that King has been doing, she just makes it to the tower and she survives, which is like the thing that King wants us to think is impossible. Mm-hmm. The thing that makes me not want to choose that is that he, like, I've learned not to take that choice in storytelling. Like if an author gives you heavy foreshadowing that somebody's going to die, it's usually a mistake to go, yeah, he just wants us to think that though. Like, no, he wants you to think that because he's going to kill the character. That's why he wants you to think that.
Yeah, sometimes you try to outsmart the author a little bit, right?
I definitely am prone to doing that. But this is maybe one case where I want to try to outsmart the author one last time. One last time, I'm going to try to outsmart the author and say that she just makes it.
Okay.
Yeah, she just makes it.
All right. Well, we will find out within the next couple weeks.
All right.
One way or another. So we wrap up this chapter with the next day and Stuttering Bill arriving on his plow. Turns out, Matt, he's one of the rare good robots. He felt terribly for poor Patrick Danville, but his programming forbid him from doing anything actively against Dandelo. But now that old asshole's gone, Bill wants to help them. He can't take orders from them, but, he can take, like, suggestions.
Uh-huh.
And the first suggestion that we get is from Roland. My first suggestion is that you fix that fucking stutter, Roland said, and then turned around amazed. Patrick had collapsed to the snow, holding his belly and voicing great blurry cries of laughter. Oi danced around him, barking, but Oi was harmless. This time there was no one to steal Patrick's joy. It belonged only to him and to those lucky enough to hear it.
Aw.
It's just like this perfect, like you can tell that King is wrapping up a part in this book, right? Because this is like a perfect like end of part. It's like, Roland says a funny joke and Patrick gets to laugh for the first time in years, potentially, without consequence. Mm-hmm. And it just, it warms your heart and your belly and you just feel happy.
Yeah. We get a nice little moment of happiness after all this tension and mm-hmm. It's delightful. I love it.
Yeah. So what do you think about Stuttering Bill? Because like for the most part, this series has been filled with bad robots. And then the last couple of robots we've met have been decent. We had Nigel and now we have Bill, mm-hmm. who they seem like good dudes.
Yeah. Well, a part of me connects this with this idea of pity because I mean, Nigel and Stuttering Bill are both characters who you pity them and you realize like, yeah, they were both doing awful things because they were robots who were made mm-hmm. to obey orders. And I mean, in like some of the robots that we've met, went mad due to like neglect and loneliness. Some of them went mad due to like resentment of the fact that they were being ordered around for like hundreds and hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. But some of them are just pathetic and sad creatures. And really, I mean, if you're of the bent that you want to grant that they're like actually sentient instead of just kind of sentient seeming, then it's sort of a horrible, monstrous moral atrocity that these sentient creatures were created as slaves and then just made so that they would last forever.
Yeah.
And here they are lingering hundreds of years later, still serving. I mean, you can't help but pity them in that light. And so, I mean, I think it's appropriate that we're introducing these kind of villain archetype that has now become pitiable at this place in the story where we're now extending pity toward Mordred.
Yeah. I mean, and just to pose a question, what's the difference between a robot who, because of his programming, can't help but do terrible things and a gunslinger who, because of Ka, can't help but allow a boy to fall mm-hmm. down into a pit in a mountain?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I mean, or a spider baby who is born with a need to feed on human flesh.
Yeah.
Like, are you gonna blame them for their nature? Yeah.
That's a great way to segue, because the chapter and this week's reading ends back on our boy Mordred, who is he gets to Dandelo's hut and he eats something. The text is very kind of cagey here when it says he eats something else as well, something he would live to regret.
Yeah, which is great, because like in that moment I was actually like, oh no, about Mordred.
Yeah,
the monster. I mean, this week's reading really cultivated some empathy. I think it's because, and again, I think it connects with that moment with the robot, where like I just feel sorry for these pathetic creatures that have been cursed to wander the earth in such miserable circumstances. Like, yeah, I mean, it reminds me of Eddie's statement that when Roland was crying his pardon, and Eddie was like, look, Roland, you can't help it, it's your nature. And Roland was like stunned by the statement. He just never thought of anything this way before. And I think that's kind of what this is, right? Yeah,
I mean, the way this ends is, it says Mordred hears a call from the tower as well.
Mm-hmm.
But his is only one call, one voice singing to him, the voice of the Crimson King. So he has his red daddy like constantly screaming at him, kill them, kill Patrick, kill Susannah, kill Roland, kill these people. And yeah, I mean, like, it's not to remove all agency from the character. He still has choice as much as anyone in this story has choice. But yeah, I think you're right that pity is what you feel here.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you're excusing his behavior, his swath of murder, and the fact that he wants to kill some of our beloved characters. You're not going to be like, okay, it's okay, Mordred, you can kill Roland now. It's fine. We understand, buddy. But yeah, I mean, like, you have these emotions towards these characters, and how much control does Mordred have? Like, he's this poor baby born into this world, abandoned by everyone.
Yeah. He's like a week old baby.
Yeah.
First thing that ever happened to him was he killed his mother because he was hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's.
Yeah, and I love the line where he said, like, he hates Roland because he was abandoned by his white daddy, and then while also saying, not paying attention to the fact that his red daddy is just as absent from his life.
Right.
Like, it's,
yeah, he's
isolated and alone, and his decision in those moments is to hate what he can't have, or what he feels he can't have. And again, like, how much we can relate the isolated, lonely Mordred that drives him to this hatred and anger and coldness with the isolated, lonely gunslinger we saw at the very beginning of the story,
mm-hmm.
who is capable of great destruction for the sake of his quest. Is not Mordred chasing after Roland just like Roland chasing after the Man in Black?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. He's compelled by his own tower, which
mm-hmm.
is Roland.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep.
Love that.
All right, so that is it for this week's reading. It is it for part 4. We're moving into the final part of the book, Matt. We have 100 pages left. That's it. Just 100 pages between us and the end of the book. Next week, we're going to begin part 5, titled The Scarlet Field of Can-Ka no Rey. We'll be covering the first 2 chapters of that part. And there's only 3 chapters in that part. So
oh man,
it's the week after that, we have chapter 3, and then we have the epilogue, and then the coda, and then we're done.
Oh man.
So it's all coming down to this.
This is intense, man.
It's crazy, isn't
Excited.
it? We're so close.
Yeah.
We're so close. All right, let's move into our discussion question, Matt, and talk about last week's question, which is, what was your favorite fairy tale conceit or concept, and why?
Dark Gazing says that they're going to go with the trope of the step parents are always cruel. The person or thing you need is always at the top of the tallest tower, so don't bother checking anywhere else. Unless maybe check 2 other places first, as it's always the third option. It's going to be just right.
Yep, that's the rule of 3.
It's the rule of 3. Make sure to pick the lowliest looking item or chest or person, as it's also a test that you can get very wrong by choosing the pricey looking item. And for Gan's sake, make it back before midnight. Yep.
These are all words of wisdom if you ever find yourself in a fairy tale.
That's right. Yeah, good point.
Full Fathom 5 says, my favorite fairy tale trope is warping fairy tales. Robert Coover is one of my favorites. He takes well-loved children's stories and messes them up. The gingerbread house is one of my favorite. Hansel and Gretel led into the forest by their haunting seeming father, while a witch described mostly by her black rags flapping around her follows. So the opposite of the beginning of The Gunslinger, I just noticed. Anyway, the symbolism is disturbing and the coming-of-age theme is darkly twisted. It is not for children. Cy King does this in Dark Tower too, I think with the references to Arthurian legend, but also in so many things he creates in which horrible things happen to children and through children. His tales may end with kids seeming to be triumphant, like the Losers Club, but the kids always end their innocence in some pretty warped ways. That's great. I like it.
Cool. Yeah, that's I have not read any of those things, so I have not much to say, but that sounds really, really fun.
Yeah, I like do you ever do like the fractured fairy tales thing? When I was like in elementary school, we did like fractured fairy tales where we had to like take a fairy tale and literally try to turn it on its head.
No.
So I took the Three Little Pigs and made them the Three Giant Lions. And then the wolf and the Itsy Bitsy Wolf.
Yeah, that's already sparking my imagination. So, yeah.
I mean, I was like in second grade, so it wasn't good, but it was fun.
Yeah, no, it's a great. That's like a really cool way to kind of generate interesting ideas, right? Just take something that exists and then be like, all right, how do I do the opposite of this?
One of the lions built his house out of titanium because that week I had learned that titanium was a very strong metal.
Yes, I'm familiar with how 7-year-olds write. All right, Pear Jane says, favorite fairy tale conceit is being lost in the woods. They say, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and my sister and I used to take long walks through the woods every day, every summer. Hi, Samantha. I know you're only a few episodes behind, but still listening.
Hi, Samantha.
Yeah. Our home was hardly remote, but it only took a 1-hour walk up a logging road to find ourselves in a wilderness with trees to the horizon. We were avid Stephen King readers going way back, and he also loves a good Lost in the Woods story. If you want to make a magical person or creature more magical, the first thing you do is make them forest dwellers. You can't live in the woods and not be one with nature, because if you're not paying attention, nature will break off a tree onto your roof, or dig through your trash, or eat your breadcrumbs, or eat your grandmother, or blow parasite snot on you. Walk lightly in the woods and stay on the path.
Yeah, Stephen King actually wrote a Lost in the Woods story, Matt. It's called The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. It's pretty short. It's only a couple hundred pages, which is like extremely short for Stephen King. It's surprisingly unpopular. I just recently read it for the first time. It was like one of my 5 that I hadn't read, and I really liked it. And then I went on Goodreads, and everyone's like, "This is like the worst Stephen King book. It's so boring." It surprised me. I liked The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Okay, I don't really know anything about it, but it sounds charming. Yeah, I was reading something about like the history of Europe the other day, and apparently like kids just being like eaten by wolves was just like a pretty common theme, like the thing that happened actually in real life. And like there was just like the fauna was way more dangerous, and I hadn't really realized before, like, oh, these fairy tales are literally told to scare the shit out of the children so they won't wander away and get eaten by wolves.
Yeah.
So that's why they're so scary. That makes a lot more sense now.
It does.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, like, I guess it's been a while since I was a kid, but like you told me that now, my first reaction was, why the fuck do I need to be told not to go into the scary woods? But I've forgotten what it's like to be a child.
Yeah. And I'd forgotten what it's like to be a child in Europe in 1200. So
yes, some would say we never knew what that was like. Yeah. But those people don't know about my past lives.
Exactly.
Man of Zimmer says, my favorite element has got to be time manipulation, going back in time, forward in time, slowing down, speeding up, freezing, reversing it, all of it. Is that a fairy tale thing?
I don't know, but we can say that it's a modern fairy tale thing.
That is true. That is very true. And they go on to talk about 11/22/63, Stephen King's novel, where hero does. This is what I love about Stephen King. Like, everyone says, like, if you go back in time, what would you do? I would kill Hitler, or I would save JFK. And then Stephen King's like, huh, cool. I'm going to write a book about that. And he did it. And he made it 800 pages long about trying to go back in time to save JFK. And it's such a good book. Such a good book.
Yeah, I definitely want to read that one. That's on my list of like ones where even if we weren't continuing this project in some form, I would want to read that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have this book. I think we've talked about this on this show before, where I bought this, like, the 1,000 best books of all time, because I said I'm going to read all of these because I'm crazy. And Stephen King appears twice on that list, and one of them, I'm blanking out what it was now. It's two that you didn't really expect. I think they put Carrie on the list, and they put 11/22/63 on the list, which both surprised me. Because that's just like, there's so many other. I love both of those books, but there's so many other books I'd put on the list before those two. But I do think if you're trying to like collect his entire career into like a couple choices, like you say, okay, I'm going to put Stephen King on this list only 2 times, and you're trying to pick things that encompass his entire career, I guess 11/22/63 is a very good like late career Stephen King example. I just don't know if I would have picked Carrie,
the first book he wrote.
Yeah,
I'd be so. If I was an author who wrote 100 books and someone was like, yeah, your first book was your best one, I would just be like, thanks. Wow.
Thanks, bud. Yeah.
All right. Next answer. Damien says, your discussion of Carmen eating the grape and awakening the pale man just after Roland and Susannah are tempted by all that cooked meat and thermal underwear got me thinking about how often food is the temptation in fairy tale and children's literature.
I think I cut off an important part of context in that, where they were discussing Pan's Labyrinth, because we just did a Doofcast episode on that last week.
We just talked about Pan's Labyrinth, where there's the scene where, which is very, very, very fairy tale heavy, where the girl is told not to eat the grape, and she eats the grape, and then the monster wakes up and tries to eat her.
Yes.
They go on to say, whether it's a gingerbread house in Hansel and Gretel, the bear's soup that tempts Goldilocks, Turkish delight in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, tiny cakes and bottles of drink that get Alice in Wonderland in trouble, the chocolate that obsesses all the children in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the parents who can't stop eating at the beginning of Spirited Away, even Coraline is lured by food in Neil Gaiman's book. Sometimes the children are hungry, but often they are just being naughty or greedy. It is all a reference to gluttony, or Eve eating the forbidden fruit, or perhaps it's because young children experience the world orally, give them something, and the first thing they do is stick it in their mouth. I mean, food as temptation makes sense for kids. They're not going to be tempted by Dark Towers or heroin. I just imagined, I just fully formed into my mind, jumped the idea of like a children's book that is like basically the Dark Tower, except it's candy, because that would work so well on all of my children. This is a genius idea. Damien, you've just made me a millionaire. Anyway, they conclude saying, interesting that it's food that tempts the children, and more often than not, they get into a situation where they themselves are going to be eaten. Much like our friend Austin Cornwell, who can't pursue the gunslingers to take the food, but becomes Mordred's meal for his troubles.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point, that like the temptation of food is really prevalent in these stories. I think that's something. It is a universality, right? That like, especially to young children, like this new, exciting, sweet food is very tempting. I've never noticed that.
I'm sorry. I can't talk anymore. I'm plotting out the story of the child who goes on a journey with their stuffed animals. The first stuffed animal falls down a pit, and let's move on. Let's move on.
Jake the stuffed lion.
Yeah, Jake the stuffed lion.
And the candy man in black saying, you can get this candy, but you have to let that lion fall.
Yeah. Go then. There are other worlds than these.
This is amazing. Okay. Next up we have ALH84001, who says, I've never met a fairy tale trope equal to Once Upon a Time, or for that matter, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. There's so much promise in those words. As we collectively round the horn on this tale, so to speak, I long for them more and more.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like telling you, settle in. You're in for a tale. That's great. Hobo Demon says, the opening and closing of fairy tales is of increased interest to me after becoming more familiar with post-structuralism, thanks to the podcast Philosophize This. The intertwined relationships between culture and language, and connotation and pedagogy, are evident to a degree in the way different practices begin and end their folktales and myths. Compare "and they lived happily ever after" with the German "and if they have not since died, then they're still alive today." And you see a culture in which the story ends because the rest of time eternal is free of conflict for the protagonist on the one hand, and on the other, a diversion of the storyteller's focus almost out of respect for the privacy of the lives of the subject, as if it was gauche of us, the audience, to gawk for too long at the misadventures of our unwilling protagonists. Consider our more elaborate ritualistic opening and closing lines, such as the Russian practice of ending a tale with an elaborate diatribe about how the story told is absolutely true and the narrator was there, and here's an anecdote about the narrator's personal experience getting plastered at the wedding or whatever. Or the Polynesian practice of opening a tale with a recounting of the local creation myth and a truncated detailing of the pedigree of the protagonist, to remind the audience to remember their roots and origins and feel as a part of the tree of life. Now, some oral traditions are simpler and meant to cue a degree of audience participation, like in Hausa, a story, let it go, let it come, and Yoruba, here is a story it is, and Creole, I say creak, crack. Some of those were like call and responses, by the way.
Yeah.
And there, through the mechanisms of either a palindromic or inverting anchor phrase or call and response audience participation element, reinforced that the point of storytelling is as much to bring the local affinity group together and strengthen bonds, and thus provide advantage on charisma checks for a time increment, as it is to act as a medium for pedagogy and morality plays. That was a hell of a comment, Hobo Demon.
Yeah, actually, I cut some off. Hobo Demon goes on and even like links sources. Everyone should go to our subreddit and read that comment because it's wonderful.
I didn't expect this master's thesis here.
Yeah. My favorite part about it is Hobo Demon, and I'm not making fun of you at all, but like it's just this remarkably well-written scholastic thing. And then at the end it says, and thus provided advantage on charisma checks.
Yeah, this is great. This is great.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling, by the author.
A person.
The author.
By the author.
The author who also wrote the story that Arrival was based on, whose name I'm blanking on. Crap.
Ted Chang.
Ted Chang. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just this idea where like the one character nitpicking that a different character didn't tell the story exactly the same way, and then being like, yes, I did. Because it's not the words that matter, it's the story that matters. I don't know, I was reminded of that. But yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, that stuff is really fascinating, like just the ways in which the cultural ways in which fairy tales, like a lot of our concept of fairy tale is very European, right? Yes. I mean, we were just talking about the Lost in the Woods standard, but there are many cultures and they have their own versions of fairy tales, and the way those fairy tales are told is informed by what is important about storytelling in those cultures.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, honestly, yeah, when I thought fairy tale, I was completely thinking European fairy tales that got turned into Disney movies because of who I am. But yeah, this is a great answer that reminds me that that's not all there is at all.
I would read an entire book about this. This is fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Hobo Demon. All right, we move on to Cassandra D, who says, my favorite fairy tale trope is definitely the deep, dark, magical forest. See, a lot of people think this. Nothing adds to the story like a good dose of anticipation. When a character rounds the bends in a path or heads off down the left-hand fork toward the cool depths of the wood, you know just something terrible and fantastic is coming. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Me too. I think my favorite part of The Hobbit is when they go into Mirkwood, and it's the definitional archetypal deep, dark, magical forest.
I really love when these stories really get me, like you said, to be afraid of this forest. Like just that, like how scary, how little we exist in true wilderness, and how scary true wilderness can be. I love when stories are able to successfully channel that.
Absolutely. I agree. Steve L says, for some reason, all I can think of is Tom Petty's Don't Come Around Here No More video with Alice ending up being the cake. Amazing song and imagery.
All right. I love creative answers to our questions.
Yes.
Finally, we have Eric T, who says, and they lived happily ever after, says that there are no other major harrowing events for the characters, and good gets rewarded and evil gets punished. They made it through to the other side, and so their part is paid for and done, and the story has a beginning, middle, and end. I think I like this because it makes the story obviously a story, because none of that is how real life works. There are consequences for actions, entanglements, and alliances that would need to be sorted out. Or maybe there's a question of what effect sleeping nonstop for 35 years has, like, physiologically. Or what do you do when you have a corpse of a giant in your front yard? And don't assume anything falls from the sky, no matter how big, will stay in one piece. I'm sure it was like a huge holy water balloon. Beyond the immediate mess and potential biohazards, there's probably going to be some kind of trauma. And they lived happily ever after, which means you can just close the book and whitewash all the complications, which is nice once in a while.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this idea to fairy tale stories that you can just close the book, and it's cool. Like, you know, you don't have the disappointing ending, the by design unsatisfying ending. They're designed to be satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that again, I'm touching upon a certain tradition of storytelling in fairy tales, but yeah, the existence of a and they lived happily ever after is kind of a way of telling you like this ended so perfectly that there's nothing else to say about it. I like that. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for all those answers, everyone. We really, really enjoyed those. Thank you for participating. Let's move on to next week's question, which will be, you know, our second to last, third to last, something to last discussion question before we finish this series.
All right.
Crazy. Next week's question is, what is the best joke that Stephen King has ever written? Which is really just another way of saying, what's your favorite Stephen King joke? But
excellent.
I think Stephen King's pretty funny. And he writes some pretty good zingers in his novels. He also loves to tweet terrible jokes from his Twitter account. It's like just designed to be corny and terrible. So maybe it's one of those. I don't know. What's your favorite? What's the best Stephen King joke?
You might have to screen some of these for me if they're maybe try to tell it without spoiling the surrounding story, you know, so that I can read them. But
don't say something cheeky like Dreamcatcher is the best.
I get that. Cool.
All right, that is it for us this week, folks. Next week, part 5, The Scarlet Field of Can-Ka no Rei begins. We'll be covering the first 2 chapters and inching ever so closer to the end of this book.
Yep. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod or over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
And of course, it's not too late to subscribe, because not only do we have another whole book to discuss after this one, we're also going to eventually have a season 2 of this show. So please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't yet. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because then you'll get to hang out. You'll know when our book club starts and hang out with us and talk about books that aren't Stephen King books, because I like those too.
Yeah. And, you know, if you subscribe to the Doofcast, then you'll get to hear us talk about all kinds of other movies, books, TV shows, and you know, just more.
Yeah, we're talking about Snowpiercer this week.
I forgot about that. But yes, we are. I need to watch that. All right. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. This week's special thanks to new Doof dancer, Sam S. Welcome, Sam. Hope you enjoy all of the cool stuff that we have over on the Patreon.
Yes, and don't forget, Sam, you can vote in our book club poll right now. You can pick what book we're doing next month.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah, we need to know.
Yes. If you cannot afford to donate, though, it is absolutely okay. You, as always, help us out by retweeting our episodes, by sharing them with friends, by sharing them in Stephen King communities. Share them with Stephen himself. That's the goal. Let's get Stephen's attention.
Yeah,
that's kind of a joke. Please don't bother people.
But actually, maybe do.
Okay, but bother him just the normal amount, not like a creepy, not like
in a weird
amount.
way. Yeah,
yeah,
only in a good way. Yeah.
And of course, you can always help us out by leaving a rating and a review for this podcast. This week's Spotlight review comes from Owl Bolt, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Well met. This podcast is absolutely fantastic. I've been a Dark Tower junkie for 13 years. It was my introduction to Stephen King's work, and I've read the series several times, as it is my all-time favorite. These guys talk through it so closely. Their discussion is lovely, entertaining, and has allowed me to discover new reasons to love The Dark Tower and many other Stephen King works." Well, geez, Owl Bolt. Thank you, Owl Bolt. I turned him into a boat, and I didn't mean to. Thank you, Owl, so much. And thank everyone who has taken the time to leave those rating and reviews. As we say every week, and as remains true every week, they do really help out. There's algorithms, there's complicated things behind the scenes, and each and every one of those reviews helps us out. Even if you don't leave a written one, please just hit those stars, because those help too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, folks, we'll see you right back here next week as the end truly begins. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.